The meter should have been resting. Physician Navith had drained the human's tissue of its stored charge 4 hours ago, watched the needle fall to the dead line, logged the reading, and moved on to the next thing that was trying to kill the girl. There had been a great many things trying to kill her. Now the needle sat 2/3 up the scale again, climbing in the slow, patient way a tide climbs, and Navith stood over the recovery cradle in the dim of the ward and did not understand what it was looking at. Sethan physicians were not built for surprise. Navith's people had tended the wounded of 9 species across the Concord's failing marches for longer than most of those species had held a flag, and the whole art of the work was that nothing surprised you. You learned the body. You learned what it held and what it spent and where it kept its reserves, and then you gave it back what it had lost, in the right order without haste. 6 slender fingers, pale and luminous at the tips, moved across the cradle's readouts and found nothing wrong with any of them. Every gauge on the girl agreed. The problem was that they agreed on something impossible. The human was called Mara Voss, 21 standard years, station-born, a conduitrigger's apprentice out of the lower maintenance tiers, and 11 hours ago she had been standing inside an open junction on Coral Anchorage's power spine when a feeder line let go. The arc that came out of the wall carried enough current to open a V-harn from crest to heel and cook a Sethan to ash where it stood. It had gone through Mara Voss and out again, and left her breathing. That was the first thing Navith had refused to believe. The rigger crew that carried her in had been babbling it. She took the whole feeder, she took all of it. She should be a shadow on the deck plate, and Navith had waved the noise away and set to work, because riggers exaggerated and current did strange things, and a body that walked in the door was a body you could save. Then it had opened the burns and found the burns wrong. Too shallow. The current had gone in, and something had swallowed most of it before it could do what current does to meat. And the girl had come out of it with a spread of surface scald down her left side, and a heart that would not settle and a great deal of pain, but she had come out of it. Now the meter was climbing again, and Navith understood slowly, with the cold care of its profession, that it had drained the girl 4 hours ago, and the girl had simply refilled. "Coran," it said. The junior came in from the outer bay, still holding the coagulant tray it had been sterilizing, and stopped when it saw where Navith was standing. Coran was young for a Sethan, its skin still bright with the overglow of the newly fledged, and it had spent the crisis hours doing what juniors did, running, fetching, holding pressure, keeping its silence. The human stable, it offered. The cardiac trace evened out 2 hours back. I logged it. "Read me the accumulation gauge." Coran crossed to the cradle, leaned and read it. Then it read it again, because juniors also learned early that when a physician adept asks you to read a number aloud, the number is not the number you expect. 61%, it said, of a Sethan baseline. That's not possible. We bled her out. I watched you. We bled her out, Navith agreed. And she is at 61% and rising, and she is doing it in her sleep, on nothing but the ward's ambient field and whatever heat this room has to spare. It drew one luminous fingertip down the readout, following the slope of the climb. There is no source. She is pulling it out of the air. They stood together in the low blue light and watched the impossible thing happen at the speed of a tide. Coral Anchorage had been dying for a long time before Mara Voss walked into the junction. Navith had been aboard 11 years and had watched it go. The ring turned around the gas giant Osara the way it always had, a battered old wheel 40 kilometers across, home to some 38,000 souls of a dozen makes, and every year the wheel turned a little rougher. The keel core that fed it, the fusion spine that ran the length of the station's long axis and pushed power out through the conduit tree to every tier, was 3 generations past the age it should have been retired, and the halcyon combine that held the station's concession had decided, in the incremental way that combines decide things, that Coral was no longer worth the cost of keeping alive. Parts stopped coming. Then the engineers who knew the parts stopped coming. Then, 4 days ago, a liquidation officer had come instead. Navith had not met the liquidation officer. It did not need to. It had tended enough dying stations to know the shape of the end when the Combine sent a Vharn in a good coat to preside over it. Physician, Corin's voice had gone careful. If she keeps rising, what happens when she reaches the top of the scale? The scale was built for a Sethin, Navith said. There is no top for her. It ends where the needle ends. What happens after that, we don't have an instrument to say. It looked at the sleeping girl, small for a human, which was to say still larger than any Sethin in the ward, short dark hair matted to a skull, a spread of healing scald down one arm in the jaw, a face slack and ordinary and entirely at rest. Wake her when the cycle turns. Gently. And Corin, say nothing to the ring about this. Not the crew, not the tier office, and above all not the Combine's officer. Not until I know what she is. What is she? Navith was quiet a moment. In its long career it had signed a great many careful, hedged, honest reports, and it disliked, on principle, saying a thing before it could be measured. But the needle was still climbing, and the girl was still breathing, and 11 years of tending a dying station had worn most of the caution out of it. She is a human, it said. I keep forgetting what that means. Mara woke to the smell of coolant and the particular blue of a Sethin ward, and for a while she just lay there and hurt. The hurt was the good kind, if there was a good kind. It was the hurt of being alive with damage, not the hurt of dying, and she had felt enough of both in 21 years on Koralt to know the difference before she was fully awake. Her left side was a single long ache from jaw to hip. Her hands worked when she told them to. Her chest felt strange, full, was the only word she had for it, the way the air felt full before a discharge, like the moment when you knew the feeder was about to jump and you were already too close. She lay in that full feeling and tried to remember why she should be dead. The junction, feeder 9. The old man, not a man, a Vharn, but her mind kept calling the tier supervisors old men the way her mother had. The supervisor had told her the feeder was cold and she'd known it wasn't. She'd felt it wrong the way she always felt them wrong, and she'd said so. And he'd told her to stop wasting the shift and clear the fault, and she'd gone in anyway because that was the job. Then the wall had opened up white. She should be dead. She turned that over and could not make it come out any other way. A feeder like 9, full open at that range. She'd seen what it did to Pruitt 2 years back, and Pruitt had caught 1/10 of what she must have caught, and there hadn't been enough of Pruitt to send home. She was thinking his name and breathing at the same time, and those two things did not belong in the same body. You're awake. The Sethin physician stood at the foot of the cradle. Mara had been tended by Sethin before, everyone on Koralt had. They were the only medics the Combine had left aboard who still gave a damn, and she knew this one by its voice, low and level, though she couldn't have said its name. It had 6 fingers on each hand and skin that glowed faintly at the tips, brighter now in the dimmed ward, and it was looking at her the way you looked at a gauge you didn't trust. How long, Mara said. Her voice came out a rasp. 11 hours since they brought you. You've been under for most of it. The physician came around the cradle unhurried. My name is Navith. Do you remember the junction? Feeder 9 let go, she swallowed. How much did I take? Navith paused. It was a small pause, but Mara had spent her life around people who paused before they told you a load was worse than the manifest, and she knew the shape of it. The crew's estimate is that you took the full discharge, Navith said. I did not believe them. I have since revised my opinion. The full, she stopped. She was still full. The word made sense now in a way it hadn't a moment ago, and she didn't like the sense it made. That's not possible. That's nobody takes a full feeder. That's a whole tier's draw. Yes, said Navith, and it is inside you, Mara Voss. Some of it left through your left side, which is why you are burned there and nowhere else. The rest did not leave. Your body took the current the way a cell takes a charge, and it is holding it, and when I emptied you 4 hours ago, you filled yourself back up from the air in this room. It let that sit. I have practiced medicine for a long time. I have never seen a body do this. I would like to understand it before anyone else learns you can, because I do not think the people who run this station will understand it kindly. Do you follow me?" Mara lay still and felt the fullness in her chest and thought about the white wall opening up, and about being alive when she should be a shadow on the deck, and she found that she followed the physician very well. "You did something to me," she said. It wasn't an accusation, she was a rigor she thought in causes. "When you patched me, you did something and it took." Navith's fingertips dimmed and brightened, a Sethan tell she didn't know how to read. "When your tissue burns as deeply as yours should have, we regrow it," it said. "We have a graft, a lattice we seed into the damage, and it teaches the body how to rebuild the cells that store and spend the body's own energy. It is old, safe, ordinary work. I have done it 10,000 times. On a Sethan it restores what was lost. On a Viharn it does a little more. On the big four-armed Ilvini it does a little less. It is calibrated to the species." It leaned closer, and for the first time Mara saw something in the flat physician's face that might have been the beginning of awe or the beginning of fear, or the thing that lived in the narrow country between them. "I seeded it into you to save your side. It did what it does. But your cells are not a Sethan cells, Mara Voss. Your kind comes off an ember-grade world." "Do you know what that means?" "It means the survey won't send people here," Mara said. "Everybody knows that. We're off the deep end of the hazard index. It's a joke on the low tiers, born on the world that eats surveyors." She'd grown up with the joke. 3 generations of Voss riggers on Koralt, and the aliens still flinched when you said where the line came from. "It is not entirely a joke." Navith straightened. "An ember-grade world is one where the ordinary business of being alive requires a body to store and burn far more energy than the survivable galaxy considers reasonable. Your kind runs hot. Your cells are packed with more than any careful physician would design, because your world would kill anything that ran cool. When I seeded the lattice into you, I gave your body the pattern for storing energy, and your body already knew that pattern better than the lattice did. It did not restore what you lost. It built more. It kept building. It is still building." The luminous fingers spread. "I made you a small repair, and your biology made you into something I do not have a word for. You are, as best I can measure, an accumulator, a living one, and you are nowhere near full." Outside the ward, somewhere down the long ring, an alarm began, the low, patient, 2-tone alarm that meant a conduit section had dropped below load and the station had rerouted around it again. Mara had heard that alarm all her life. It had been rare once. Now it came most days. She lay in the blue light with a tear's worth of current sitting quiet in her chest and listened to her station announce, one more time, that it was dying. "How much can I hold?" she said. Navith looked at her for a long moment. "I don't know," it said. "Let's find out carefully." Overseer Sarath did not like the smell of the station. He had noted it the moment the transit lock cycled him aboard 4 days ago, and he had failed in the days since to stop noting it. It was the smell of a machine running too long past its allowance, hot polymer, old coolant, the particular sourness of air scrubbers asked to do more than their rating for more years than their design. To a Viharn of good tier, raised in the clean pressurized halls of the Combine's inner holdings, it was the smell of failure itself, and Sarath found that it clung to his coat. He had begun to resent the coat. His office for the duration was the old harbor master's suite on the command tier, a room built when Koralt was young and proud and meant to matter, and it still had the bones of that pride. A broad viewport curving out over Asara's banded face, brass fittings gone soft with polish and age, a floor of real stone shipped up a gravity well by people who had believed the station would be worth it. Sarath stood at the viewport with his cartilaginous crest low and flat, which in a Viharn was the posture of a creature doing some it disliked, and watched the gas giant turn. "Read me the reclamation figure again," he said. The clerk behind him, a thin, nervous Sethan the Combine kept on the books, not one of the medical ones, read it again. It was a large negative number. It had been a large negative number all 4 days, and no arrangement of the columns made it smaller. Coral anchorage cost more to keep breathing than the Combine could ever pull back out of it. The keel core would need a replacement the Combine would not fund. The ring's orbit over Asara sagged a little deeper into the giant's radiation belt each year and would, within a calculable number of years, need a station-keeping burn the failing core could no longer power, and after that it would need another, and the day would come when it could not make the burn at all, and the wheel would begin its long fall into the banded clouds. The engineers had a name for that day. Sareth had read it in the file. He did not intend to be aboard for it. "The recommendation stands, then," he said. It was not a question. He had written the recommendation on the transit in before he ever smelled the station, and the 4 days had only confirmed what the columns already knew. Declare Coralt a total loss. Evacuate the concession's liabilities in order of contractual priority, which was to say, the paying tiers first, the registered contract labor after, and the rest, the unregistered, the third-generation station-born who had never signed anything because their grandparents had been born aboard, and no one had thought to make them. The rest in whatever order the lifeboats allowed, which everyone in the room understood to mean not at all. "There is the matter of the medical wing's objection," the clerk said, carefully. Physician-adept Navith filed a. "The physicians always object." Sareth turned from the viewport. "It is what we keep them for. They object, we note the objection goes in the file, and the file goes to the arbiters, and by the time the arbiters have read it this station will be a smear in Asara's clouds and no one will care what a Sethan wrote. Note it. Move on." He crossed to the old desk and set one long slate-gray hand on the stone, and permitted himself, for a moment, the small, clean pleasure of a decision made. He was good at this. It was ugly work and someone had to have the stomach for it. And Sareth had discovered young that he had the stomach for a great many things his betters flinched from, and that the flinching was where the profit lived. "What is the population figure I am to sign against?" 38,200 of record, the clerk said. "The unregistered are estimated at another." "Of record," Sareth said. "I sign against the record. What is not on the record is not my liability." He looked out at Asara again, at the wheel's long shadow lying across the clouds, and did not think about the number that was not on the record, because a Harn who thought about the number that was not on the record did not last long in the reclamation service, and Sareth intended to last a very long time. He did not yet know the name Mara Voss. In 4 days he would know little else. They tested her in the dead ward, the sealed one at the end of the medical wing, where Coralt had once quarantined the plagues that came up the gravity well, and now stored nothing but broken cradles. Navith chose it because it had its own isolated conduit tap and a door that shut against the ring, and because, whatever Mara Voss turned out to be, the physician did not want the station to learn it before the physician did. Chief Rithka came because Navith needed someone who understood power the way Navith understood flesh, and because the chief of Coralt's power systems was the one alien aboard the physician trusted to keep a secret out of self-interest. Rithka was Ithran, blue chitinous, 6-limbed, the plating along its back gone dull and scored with decades of the work, and it had kept the keel core alive years past the day the Combine's paper said it should have died, on salvage and spite, and an intimacy with the old machine that no schematic could teach. It came into the dead ward, looked at the small human sitting on the edge of a cradle with a rigger's patched jacket over the medical gown, looked at the isolated tap Navith had exposed in the wall, and said, "You want to run her against the grid." "I want to measure what she holds," Navith said, "and what she can move and what it costs her to move it, carefully, in small increments, with a hand on the breaker at every step." Rithka's mandibles worked, the Ithran gesture for thinking. "You told me she took feeder 9. "I did." "Feeder 9 is a tier trunk. That is not a body, that is a substation." The chief turned its flat, faceted eyes on Mara. You are the Voss girl, Delgo's apprentice. Delgo's dead, Mara said. Feeder 9 took him too, 8 months ago. I've been running his section since. She said it flat, the way riggers said the worst things, because you learned early on the low tiers that if you let the deaths land while you were still on shift, they'd take you with them. So if you're asking whether I know what a tier trunk is, Chief, I ran one for 8 months short a man, on your grid, and nobody up top ever noticed the section didn't fall over. So let's not do the part where you tell me what current is. The dead ward was quiet. Navith's fingertips brightened. Rithka regarded the girl for a long moment, and then something in the set of its plated shoulders shifted, the wariness going out of it, replaced by something a working creature reserves for another working creature. No, it said. Let's not. It set its case down and began with 4 hands to lay out instruments. Small increments, the physician says. We'll start below a hand lamp. If you feel anything wrong, heat, pressure, a taste, anything, you say so and I open the breaker. You do not be brave. Brave is how I lose engineers. Do you understand me? I understand you, Mara said. They started below a hand lamp. The first increment was so small that the instruments barely moved. A trickle Mara pushed out through the isolated tap into a bank of dead cells Rithka had wired up to catch it. She sat on the edge of the cradle with 2 fingers resting against the exposed contact, and did the thing Navith asked her to do, which was to want the current to go, gently, the way you wanted a stuck valve to turn, and it went. She felt it go. It was the strangest sensation of her life and also the most familiar, because it was exactly the feeling she'd chased her whole career, the rigger's sense of where the power wanted to flow, except now the power wanted to flow out of her. Point 1, Rithka read off. Point 2, holding steady, charge on the catch bank climbing clean, no spike, no bleed. Its mandibles had gone very still. Girl, give me a little more, slowly. She gave it a little more. The catch bank filled. Rithka wired in a second bank, and a third, and Navith watched the readouts on Mara's body the whole time, her heart, her heat, the accumulation gauge that had climbed while she slept and now, as she spent, began at last to fall. By the end of the first hour, they had charged every dead cell in the ward, and Mara had come down 11%, and she was not tired. By the end of the third hour, Rithka had run a heavy cable in from the corridor, and Mara had, sitting on the edge of a broken cradle in a medical gown, quietly pushed enough current down it to run the dead ward's long dark lighting rig, the corridor beyond, and a bank of test loads the chief kept hauling in. And she had come down 40%, and refilled 20 of it from the ambient of a room that was now noticeably warmer than it had been. And she had a headache and a deep ache behind her breastbone, and she was, by her own flat report, fine. Rithka sat back on its rearmost limbs and looked at the numbers it had written down and did not speak for a while. Chief, Navith said. I'm doing the sum, Rithka said. Let me do the sum. Its mandibles worked. When it spoke again, its voice had gone quiet and careful in the way of a creature that has just seen the edge of something large. Physician, you understand what the keel core is. It is a fusion spine 40 kilometers long that puts out enough to run this whole wheel, and it is dying, and there is no replacing it. And when it can no longer make the station-keeping burns, we fall into Asara. You understand that is the shape of our death. I understand it. This girl, Rithka said, sitting on a broken cradle at 40% spent and not yet tired, has moved more power in 3 hours than the emergency cells of an entire tier hold, and she filled most of it back from the warmth of a room. It set down its stylus. I am not saying she is a keel core. She is not a keel core. But I have spent 11 years watching this station die by increments because we could not find the current to hold it together, and I have just watched a human being pull a tear's load out of her own chest and ask me if that was enough. So I would like to know, physician, before I let myself think the thought I am beginning to think, I would like to know what it costs her. Because everything on this station costs something, and the things that seem free cost the most. They both looked at Mara. She was sitting with her burned arm cradled against her, and there was a sheen of sweat on her, and the deep ache behind her breastbone had put a line between her brows that had not been there in the first hour. But she met the chief's faceted eyes steadily, and when she spoke her voice was level. "It costs," she said. "You're right that it costs. It's like you ever hold a load off a bad hoist. Not lift it, just hold it, keep it from dropping. You can do it a long time, longer than you'd think. But the whole time it's taking something out of you that you don't get back the same day. That's what this is. I can hold a lot. I can move a lot, but it's coming out of the part of me that doesn't refill from a warm room." She looked down at her own hands. "I don't know how much of that part I've got." "Neither do you. So if we're going to do the thing you're both not saying, if you're going to ask me to be the core, then I need you to promise me you'll count. Both of you. You'll count what it costs and you'll tell me when I'm spending something I can't buy back, because I'll do it. I'll hold the load, but I'm not brave, Chief. You said it yourself. Brave is how you lose people. I want somebody counting." The dead ward was silent again, and this time the silence had weight. "I'll count," said Rithkai. "We both will," said Navith, and then, because it was a physician and could not help itself, "And you will not do the thing tonight or tomorrow. We measure first. We learn the shape of the cost before we ask you to pay it. That is not caution for its own sake. That is how you spend a resource you cannot replace." Its fingers dimmed. "You are, at present, the most valuable object on this station, Mara Voss, and the station does not know you exist, and I intend to keep it that way until we know what we are spending." They did not keep it that way for very long. The way it got out was the way things always got out on a dying station, through the maintenance logs. Rithka had run the heavy cable and the test loads off a corridor tap, and a corridor tap draws off a section, and a section reports its draw to the tier office, and the tier office's ledger, automated, unwatched, one of 10,000 small honest machines that kept the wheel's accounts, noticed that a dead ward at the end of the medical wing had drawn and dispersed a great deal of power over the course of an afternoon, and it noted the anomaly, and it flagged it. And the flag went into the daily reconciliation, the way flags did. And the daily reconciliation, for the first time in a long time, was being read. It was being read because Overseer Sareth's clerk, a thorough and frightened Sethan who understood that its own passage off the doomed station depended entirely on the Overseer's goodwill, had been told to comb the station's ledgers for anything the Combine might reclaim, any stockpile, any hoarded fuel cell, any asset that had gone unlisted, and an afternoon's worth of unexplained power moving through a dead ward was exactly the shape of thing a frightened clerk flags to prove its worth. So the clerk flagged it, and Sareth, who was bored, and who had learned in a long career that boredom on a dying station was where the surprises hid, told the clerk to find out where the power had gone. The clerk pulled the medical wing's access records. It found Physician-Adept Navith's authorizations, and Chief Rithkaz on a sealed quarantine ward 3 days running, hours at a stretch. It found a patient admission from the day of the Feeder 9 failure, 1 Mara Voss, unregistered labor, expected deceased, status revised to recovering. It found that the physician had filed the objection to the reclamation, and it found that the same physician was now moving a tier's worth of power through a sealed room with the station's chief engineer and 1 unregistered human, and the clerk, being thorough and frightened and not at all stupid, put those things beside each other and carried them to the overseer. Sareth read the clerk's summary twice. He was not a fool. Fools did not last in the reclamation service. He did not leap to the impossible. His first thought was theft, that the physician and the engineer had found some cache of power the Combine could reclaim and were moving it, skimming it, hiding it in a dead ward against the evacuation. That was a thought that fit the world he knew. He had built a career on the reliable ugliness of others, and a physician and an engineer stealing from a doomed station to buy their own way off, it was the most ordinary story he could imagine. So he went down to the medical wing himself, with 2 of the concession security, big yellow-eyed Kesu mercenaries the Combine kept for exactly this, all muscle and contempt. Because a Viharn of good tier did not send a clerk to catch a thief. He came and caught the thief himself, and he watched the guilt break across the thief's face, and it was the closest thing to pleasure the reclamation service offered. He did not find a thief. He found a sealed ward, and a Sethan physician that would not open it, and a chief engineer that put 4 hands flat against the door and said, in the mild tone of a creature that has spent 11 years being right about things the Combine was wrong about, that the overseer did not have medical authority aboard and could not enter a quarantine without it. And Sareth, who did not care in the least for a Sethan's authorities, told the Kesu to open the door. The Kesu opened the door. Inside the dead ward the light was up, and the air was hot, and there were heavy cables run across the floor to banks of cells that a Viharn of good tier would not have recognized as anything but junk, and standing among them, small and burned and entirely unhurried, holding a live contact in one bare hand, while a meter on the wall behind her ran up a figure that made no sense, was a human girl in a rigger's jacket. She looked at the overseer in his good coat, and at the 2 Kesu filling the doorway with their yellow eyes and their contempt, and she did not startle, and she did not let go of the contact, and she did not stop doing the thing she was doing. She simply looked at him, the way a rigger looks at a supervisor who has walked into a live section without knowing it, and said, "You want to stand a little further back." Sareth did not stand further back. He was a Viharn of good tier, and he did not take instruction from unregistered labor. He stepped into the ward over the first heavy cable to see for himself what asset his station had been hiding. The meter on the wall was still climbing. The girl watched him come, and something moved behind her flat, ordinary face. Not fear. He would think about that later at length. It was the not fear that stayed with him, something that was almost, he thought, patience. As though she had already worked out how this would go and was only waiting for the room to catch up. "Chief," she said, not looking away from Sareth, "how much you want to keep in the banks?" "Keep it all," Rithkas said quietly. "We are not putting on a show for the Combine." "No," Mara agreed. "We're not." And she let a very small amount of what she was holding go. Not into the banks, not into the cables, just off the contact and into the air of the room. A controlled bleed, the kind of thing a rigger did to prove a line was hot without hurting anyone, and every hair on Overseer Sareth's slate-gray hide stood up at once, and the good coat's fittings sang, and the 2 Kesu behind him made a sound Sareth had never heard a Kesu make, and the Overseer of the Reclamation stopped where he stood. One long hand half raised, and understood all at once and much too late that he had walked into a live section. "I told you to stand back," Mara said without heat. "I'm not going to tell you the interesting things twice." Sareth did not sleep that night, and he was a Viharn who prized his sleep. He sat in the old harbor master's suite with Asara turning below the viewport, and the report of what he had seen laid out on the stone desk in front of him. And he did the only thing a creature of his make and profession knew how to do with a fact this size, which was to turn it into a number, and then decide who owned the number. The girl was an asset, that much was immediate and clean. He had walked into that ward expecting to catch a thief, and had instead found the single most valuable object he had encountered in 11 years of picking over the Combine's dying holdings, a living accumulator that filled itself from the air, that moved a substation's load out of its own body, that was, if the chief engineer's numbers could be believed, capable of things the Reclamation Service had no category for. The Combine did not have a line item for a human that ran a city. It would need to invent one, and the Viharn who brought such an asset in from a written-off station would not be a liquidation officer much longer. He would be, Sareth allowed himself to think, in the clean pressurized halls where the smell did not cling to the coat, precisely as far from stations like this one as it was possible for a Viharn to get. So the question was not whether to take her. The question was how to take her cleanly, and here the world Sareth knew failed him for the first time in a long career, because the thing he had learned in the dead ward, standing with every hair on his hide raised and one hand half lifted, and the girl watching him with that flat, unafraid patience, was that he could not simply take her. The Kesu could not take her. He had seen the Kesu understand it too. They had not moved when he ordered them forward, and he had not, he found, been able to make himself order them again. You did not lay hands on a live section. Every creature in that room, down to its oldest animal, had known it. He would have to buy her then, or trap her, or convince her. And to do any of those he would need to understand what she wanted, and what she was afraid of, and where the leverage lay, and the trouble, the maddening trouble, was that a creature that walks into a live feeder and comes out breathing does not appear to be afraid of the things that made Sareth's leverage work. He had leverage anyway. He always had leverage. It only took him until the small hours to find where it lived, and when he found it he set down his stylus and let his crest rise because it was, he had to admit, elegant. She was unregistered. So was her whole tier, the third-generation station-born, the ones with no contract, no passage, no claim on a lifeboat when the evacuation came. 38,000 of record, the clerk had said, and another number that was not on the record, and the girl was one of that second number, and so was everyone she had ever known. Mara Voss was not afraid for herself. Sareth had seen that clearly enough to have stopped being angry about it. But she had run a dead man's section for 8 months so that a tier would keep its lights, and a creature that does that is not a creature without fear. It is a creature that has moved its fear into other people. And that, Sareth thought, folding his long hands, was a leverage that worked on the unafraid as well as it worked on anyone. He did not have to threaten her, he only had to hold the lifeboats. Rithka found her in the keel gallery before the shift bell, because Rithka had known she would be there. The keel gallery ran the length of the station's spine, a long armored catwalk slung beside the core itself, and it was where riggers went when they needed to think, because it was the one place on Koralt where you could put your hand on the wall and feel the whole station's pulse coming up through the plating. Mara was standing at the rail with her burned arm out of its sling, palm flat against the warm armor, her eyes closed. She did that. Rithka had watched her do it for years without knowing what she was doing. It knew now. "You can feel it," the chief said, "not a question." "I could always feel it." She didn't open her eyes. "That's why I was good. I could feel where the load wanted to go before the gauges caught up. Delgo taught me that, said the gauges tell you where the power was a second ago, but a rigger who's paying attention feels where it's going." Her hand pressed flatter to the wall. "It's worse than the gauges say, Chief. The core, I can feel it. It's not just tired. There's a place about a third of the way down where the pulse hitches, like a bad heart skipping. It's been skipping for months, and it's getting worse, and the gauges won't show it till the day it stops." Rithka came to the rail beside her and put 2 of its own hands on the armor, and was quiet, feeling for the thing she felt, and after a while its mandibles moved. "There is a resonance in the third quarter," it admitted. "I have been nursing it for a year. I did not think anyone else could feel it. The Combine's inspectors certainly could not." It looked down the long gallery toward the place where the pulse hitched. "It is the beginning of the end, Voss. When that quarter goes, the core cannot hold its rhythm, and when it cannot hold its rhythm it cannot make the burns, and Asara takes us. I have known this for a year, and I have told no one but the physician, because there is nothing to be done, and a station that knows it is dying dies faster." "How long?" "A year, perhaps 2. Perhaps," Rithka said, "a great deal less, because a resonance like that does not fail on a schedule. It fails when it fails." It turned its faceted eyes on her. "The overseer has requested a meeting. You, the physician, myself. This morning in the harbor master's suite. He was very courteous about it, which is how I know it is bad." Mara opened her eyes at last. "He wants to own me." "Yes." "He can't." "No," Rithka agreed, "but he can own the lifeboats, and I think, Voss, that he has worked that out. He did not last night. This morning he has the look of a creature that has slept on a good idea." The chief's voice was very level. I will be honest with you because you asked me to count, and counting means telling you the true numbers. If the overseer offers to put your tier on the boats in exchange for you, I do not know what you will say, and I do not know what I would advise. Because he is not wrong that you could buy them their lives. You could. That is the terrible thing about what you are. You have turned into the one currency that can pay for the thing you love, and the Combine has noticed. Myra took her hand off the wall. Then let's go hear what he's selling, she said. The harbor master's suite had been built to impress, and it still did, and Mara understood the moment she walked in that this was the point. Sareth had chosen the room the way a rigger chose a gauge, for what it would make the other party feel. The broad viewport with Asara filling it, the real stone underfoot. The overseer himself standing against the light with his good coat and his crest held high, flanked by the two Kesu who would not meet her eyes this morning, and by the thin, frightened clerk with its slate held ready. "Miss Voss," Sareth said, "thank you for coming. Please sit, all of you." He did not sit. "I will not waste your morning with courtesies you have no reason to trust. You understand what you have become. I understand what you have become. I think it best we speak plainly as people who understand the same fact." "Plain's good," Mara said. She did not sit either. Navith stood at her left, luminous and still. Rithkas stood at her right, plating dull in the bright room. "Coral anchorage is a written loss," Sareth said. "That is not cruelty, it is arithmetic, and it was decided before I ever came aboard. The station will be evacuated. The evacuation will proceed by contractual priority, because that is the law the Combine operates under, and I did not write it. The paying tiers first. The registered labor after. And then," he spread one long hand, "the boats run out. You know this. You are, if the records are right, among those for whom the boats run out, as is your tier, as is, I would estimate, everyone you have ever known aboard this wheel." "I know how the boats work," Mara said. "I've known since I was a kid. Get to the part where you sell it back to me." Something flickered in the overseer's flat face, not offense, Navith thought, watching him. Something more like a gambler's small pleasure at finding the other player knows the game. Directness. "Good." Sareth folded his hands. "You are an asset the Combine has no precedent for, Miss Voss, and I am the officer who found you. I can write you onto any manifest I choose. I can write your tier onto the boats, all of them, the unregistered, the third generation, every soul you are frightened for. I have the authority. It requires only my signature." He let it sit. "In exchange, you will come with me when this is done to the inner holdings where the people who understand what you are will want to understand it further. You will be studied. You will be cared for extraordinarily well. You are far too valuable to waste. And you will never see this station or these people again, because they will be alive on a colony world of the Combine's choosing, and you will be elsewhere being what you are for us. That is the offer. Your tiers' lives for yourself. I will not pretend it is a kind offer. I will only point out that it is a real one, and that no one else in the galaxy is going to make it to you, and that the alternative is that you and everyone you love fall into Asara together in a year or a month or a week, having saved no one, because you were too proud to be owned." The room was quiet. Asara turned in the viewport. Navith watched the girl and prepared itself with a physician's dread for what a cornered creature does. It had seen this cornering done to others. It had seen what people gave up when you moved their fear into the people they loved, and then offered to sell the fear back. It braced for the girl to break, or to bargain, or to weep. Myra Voss looked at the overseer for a while. Then she walked past him, to the viewport, and looked down at the gas giant, and put one hand flat against the cold glass the way she put her hand against the warm armor of the core, and she was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, she did not turn around. "You've never run a section," she said. "Have you? Not once. You've read about it. You've got a file that tells you what a section is, but you've never stood in one with the load coming and felt where it wants to go." She took her hand off the glass. "Here's the thing you don't know because you've never done the work. You think you're holding the lifeboats. You think that's your leverage, you've got the boats, I've got the power, we trade. But that's not the section we're standing in, Overseer. You want to know the real section? She turned around at last, and her flat, ordinary face was very calm. The real section is that your core is dying and I'm the only thing on this wheel that can hold it. Not evacuate. Hold. Keep 38,000 people alive right here, on this station, past the day your arithmetic says they die. And you can't take me to your inner holdings to do that because the holding only works here on this core, with the chief who knows the machine and the physician who knows my body and the station under my hand. Take me away and I'm a curiosity in a clean room. Leave me here and I'm the reason your written loss is still breathing. She let that land. So you don't have the leverage, Overseer. You never did. You've got a hold full of lifeboats that hold 4,000, and I've got the only thing that keeps the other 34,000 off the arithmetic. Now, you want to trade for real, or you want to keep pretending you found an asset instead of walking into a live section. Overseer Sareth stood very still against the light of Asara. He was a Viharn of good tier, and he had built a long career on the reliable ugliness of others, on finding the fear in a room and holding it, and he had walked into this room certain he held the fear, and he understood now, with the same cold late clarity he had felt in the dead ward with his hand half raised, that he did not. The girl had not raised her voice. She had not threatened him. She had simply, in the flat patient tone of a creature explaining a live circuit to someone about to touch it, taken his leverage apart and set the pieces on the stone floor between them, and shown him that he had misread the section, and that the misreading was the kind that got people killed. "What?" he said, and had to begin again, because his voice had done something he did not permit it to do. "What is it you propose?" "I propose you stop trying to own me and start using me," Mara said. "You want off this station a hero instead of a bookkeeper. Fine. Here's how you do it. You put me on the core with the chief and the physician, and you let me hold it. You get your combine to fund the burns and the repairs while I keep the wheel alive. Because now you can tell them the loss isn't a loss. It's a station that a human being is holding together with her bare hands. And that's not a write-off, Overseer. That's a story the inner holdings will pay for. You keep the boats fueled and ready in case I'm wrong. And when this is over, if I'm still standing, then you and I have a conversation about the inner holdings and I'll listen because I'm not stupid and I know what I've turned into. But the price of the conversation is 38,000 people alive, not 4,000, all of them. That's the trade. That's the only trade. And you're going to take it, because the other thing you can do is nothing. And a Viharn who does nothing while a human saves a station he wrote off is going to have a very hard time explaining to the inner holdings why he was in the way. Navith watched the Overseer's crest, which was the only honest thing on him, and saw it come down slowly from its high proud angle to the low flat set of a creature doing sums it disliked and could not make come out any other way. "You are asking me," Sareth said, "to fund a station I was sent to bury." "I'm telling you," Mara said, "that you buried the wrong station. This one's not dead. You just met the reason." She picked up her sling from where she'd set it and worked her burned arm back into it, unhurried, the meeting apparently over as far as she was concerned. "Chief, physician, let's go put me on the core." She stopped at the door and looked back at the Overseer one more time, and there was nothing in her face that a 65-year-old dockhand watching from the cheap tiers would have called cruelty, only the flat certainty of someone who had already run the numbers and found them survivable. "You can watch, if you want, Overseer. Might do you good. Man ought to see the section he's standing in at least once before he signs it off." She went out. After a moment, the chief and the physician followed her, and the two Kesu stood aside to let them pass, and did not look at the Overseer, and that, the Kesu not looking at him, was the thing Sareth found he could not stop turning over, long after the stone room was empty and Asara had rolled its slow face across the viewport. The two hired killers stepping aside for a burned girl in a sling and declining, out of some old animal courtesy, to watch their employer be taught the shape of the room. Rithka had spent 40 years learning that machines did not care what you needed from them, and it took the chief the better part of a day to build a thing that would let a human care for the machine in its place. The trouble was the coupling. Mara could push power out of herself into a contact, and a rigor's sense told her where it wanted to go, but the keel core was not a bank of dead cells in a quarantine ward. It was 40 kilometers of fusion spine with a distribution tree of a complexity no single body was ever meant to interface with, and if she pushed wrong, if she fed the core's rhythm out of phase, or dumped current into a conduit that could not carry it, she would not gently overload a test load. She would open a feeder like the one that had nearly killed her, except from the inside, with her own hand on the contact. So Rithka built her a bridge. It took the old rigger's harness from Delgo's locker. Mara had not known the chief kept it, and did not say anything when it was set on the bench in front of her, only touched the worn strap for a moment and then put it on, and it wired the harness into the keel gallery's primary tap through a bank of governors salvaged from 3 dead systems, so that whatever Mara pushed would pass through the chief's instruments before it reached the core, and the chief could read it and shape it and cut it. She would be the source. Rithka would be the hand on the valve, and Navith would stand at her other side with its own instruments on her body, reading the cost as she spent, with the single flat authority they had all agreed to. When the physician said stop, everyone stopped. They did the first holding at the 3rd quarter hitch, because that was where the station was dying. Mara stood at the keel gallery rail with the harness on and her palm flat against the warm armor in the place where the pulse skipped, and she closed her eyes and felt for the rhythm the way she'd felt for it her whole life. And this time, for the first time, she did not just feel where the power was going. She went with it. "Talk to me," Rithka said. Its voice was very steady, the way a voice gets steady when its owner has decided to be steady on purpose. "Small, you are not filling the core, you are steadying it. Find the skip and hold the beat under it. Do not lead. Follow the machine and put your shoulder under the place where it stumbles. Talk to me while you do it." "I feel it," Mara said. Her voice had gone quiet and far away, the way it did when a rigger went deep into a section. "It's like the beat comes down the spine and it's fine, and then right here it drops half a beat like the machine forgets, and then it catches itself, and the catch is what's wearing it out. Every catch takes a little more." Her burned hand pressed flatter to the armor. "I can feel where it's going to drop. I can feel it coming. I could, Chief, I could put the beat in before it drops. Fill the gap so it never skips, then it wouldn't have to catch." "Slowly," Rithka said. "The governors are set low. If you feed too fast, I open the breaker and we start again. Slowly, Voss, put 1 beat in the gap." "1." She put 1 beat in the gap. Rithka watched its instruments and felt, through 40 years of intimacy with the old machine, the thing happened that it had not felt in a year. The 3rd quarter of the keel core came down the spine, reached the place where it forgot itself and did not forget. The half-beat drop, the small daily death that had been wearing the core toward its end, simply filled, smoothed. The pulse came through whole. The chief stared at its instruments and its mandibles stopped moving entirely. "Chief," Navith said. "The resonance is gone," Rithka said. It did not believe its own instruments. It put 2 hands on the armor and felt for the skip with its own body, down the years of knowing, and the skip was not there. "The 3rd quarter resonances, she is holding the beat under it. The core is running clean. For the first time in a year, the core is running clean." It turned its faceted eyes on the small human at the rail, standing with her eyes shut and her palm on the wall and a line of concentration between her brows, doing with her body the thing 40 years of engineering could not do with parts the Combine would not send. "How does it feel?" the chief asked, and it did not mean the machine. "Like holding a load off a bad hoist," Mara said from far away. "I can do it a long time, longer than you'd think." A pause. "But you're right that it costs. Keep counting." Navith was counting. The physician stood at her side with its instruments on her heart and her heat, and the deep reserve it had no proper name for, the part of her that did not refill from a warm room, and it watched the numbers and said nothing, because the numbers were not yet bad, and because a physician learns that there is a mercy in silence when the news is only that the cost is real and not yet ruinous. She could hold the core. She could hold it a long time. And every hour she held it, she spent a little of the thing that did not come back, and the physician wrote the figure down, and kept the fear off its luminous face, and counted. They fell into a rhythm over the days that followed, the way people do even inside a slow catastrophe, and the rhythm was this. Mara held the core in shifts. She could not hold it always. Navith was firm on this and Rithka enforced it, and Mara, to her credit, did not fight them, because she had asked them to count, and a person who asks to be counted has to honor the count. So she held the third quarter hitch 4 hours on and 8 hours off, and in the off hours the core skipped again as it always had, and Rithka nursed it the old way, and it was a station dying slower instead of a station not dying. But slower was more than Koralt had been given in a long time, and the difference showed. It showed first in the small things. A tier that had been running its lights at half to spare the load ran them full. An air scrubber the chief had been babying past its rating got shut down and rested and brought back clean. The two-tone alarm that meant a conduit had dropped below load, the alarm Mara had heard all her life, the alarm that had become the station's heartbeat, went quiet for a day, and then for 2 days, and the low tiers noticed the quiet the way you notice a toothache stopping, not all at once, but as a slow realization that something that had always hurt had left off hurting. And it showed, most of all, in the tiers learning what was holding them up. They kept it quiet as long as they could, and they could not keep it quiet long, because 38,000 people share the same air and the same gossip. And the story of the Voss girl who walked out of Feeder 9 and now stood on the keel gallery holding the core in her bare hands was exactly the kind of story a dying station starves for. It went down the tiers the way power goes down a conduit, and it changed as it went, the way stories do. And by the end of the first week, there were versions of Mara Voss circulating on the low tiers that she would have laughed at if she'd had the strength to laugh. But the core of every version was true, and the truth of it did a thing to the station that Navith, who had watched Koralt die by increments for 11 years, had not expected and did not, at first, know how to measure. The station stopped behaving like it was dying. People fixed things. Not because the Combine sent parts. The Combine sent nothing, though Soreth's promised funding had begun to trickle in, enough for the burns, enough for the coolant, enough to keep the arithmetic from closing, but because a station that has a reason to be alive tomorrow starts acting like it will be. Riggers who had been coasting through the long dying went back down into the conduit tree and pulled faults that had been flagged and forgotten for years. The mess halls on the low tiers, which had gone quiet, got loud again. Someone repainted the tier markers in the keel gallery approach, badly, in the only paint they had, and no one made them stop. Mara did not like being the reason. Navith could see that too, and it was, the physician thought, the most human thing about her, that she could hold a dying station's heart in her hands without a tremor and could not stand to be thanked for it. She took to using the maintenance passages to get from the ward to the keel gallery, the long, ugly way, because the short way went through the tiers, and the tiers had started to look at her. Once a child on the low tiers, a human child from the enclave, 6 or 7, dirty-kneed and fearless, the way station kids were, got past its mother and ran up to Mara in the approach and asked her, with the total seriousness of the very young, whether it was true she ate the lightning. No, Mara told it, crouching down to its level with her burned arm held careful. I don't eat it. I just hold on to it for a while, like this. And she'd taken the kid's hand and let the smallest bright spark she could make hop from her fingertip to its palm, nothing, less than the shock of a dry corridor in winter, but the kid's whole face had lit up with it and told it, that's all it is. It just wants somewhere to go. I'm somewhere it can go. That's the whole trick. And the kid had run back to its mother shouting that the lightning girl had put a star in its hand, and Mara had watched it go with something on her face that Navith, standing at a distance, had filed away and thought about for a long time, because it was the only time in all of it that the physician saw the girl look afraid. The first real crisis came on the 9th day in the off hours, when Mara was not on the core. It came the way real crises come, not with the thing they had all been watching, but with a thing no one had been watching at all. The keel core held, nursed through the hitch by Rithka the old way. What failed was a coolant manifold in the outer ring, in the mid-tiers, a section of pipe that had been on the deferred maintenance list for 6 years, and would have stayed on it for 6 more if the station had died on schedule. It let go in the 3rd watch, and the loss of coolant tripped a cascade, and the cascade dropped the environmental plant for 4 mid-tier sections all at once, and 11,000 people woke in the dark to air that had stopped moving and heat that had begun, immediately, to climb. Mara was asleep in the ward when the alarm changed. Not the 2 tones she'd heard all her life, a different alarm, one she'd heard only twice, the one that meant a habitable section had lost its air handling. She was on her feet before she was fully awake, the way riggers are, and Navith was already there, and Rithka's voice was coming over the ward's old comm, tight and fast. 4 sections down in the mid-ring. Coolant cascade took the environmental plant. I can bring the plant back, but it needs power to restart the pumps and hold them while the cascade clears, and I cannot pull that much off the core without dropping the hitch, and if I drop the hitch during a restart surge, the chief did not finish. It did not need to. Voss, I need you on the core, and I need you feeding a section restart at the same time, and those are 2 hands and you have 1 body. Physician. Tell me what she can do. Navith had its instruments on her before she'd finished pulling on Delgo's harness. It read the numbers. She was rested. She was near full. The deep reserve was down from where it had started 9 days ago, but not yet into the country the physician feared. And it did the calculation it had been dreading since the dead ward, the calculation of a resource against a need, and it did not like the answer, and it gave the answer anyway because that was the job. She can do both, Navith said. Once, for as long as the restart takes, and no longer. Chief, how long is the restart? If it goes clean, 20 minutes. If the cascade fights me, an hour. She has the hour, Navith said. She does not have the hour and then a shift on the core after. If she spends the hour, she rests a full day, and she does not touch the core again until I say. That is the price. Voss. I heard the price. Mara had the harness on, and her palm was already going to the wall. 11,000 people, Chief. 2 hands, 1 body. Tell me where you want them. Hold the hitch with the core side, Rithka said, and feed the restart through the gallery tap. I will shape both. You will feel me pulling from 2 places at once, and it will be wrong and it will hurt, and you will want to give the restart everything because that is where the screaming is. Do not. If you starve the hitch to feed the restart, the core skips during a surge and we lose the whole ring instead of 4 sections. You hold the hitch first, the restart second, the screaming last. Can you do that? Mara stood with 1 hand on the warm armor of the dying core, and 1 hand out toward the tap that fed 11,000 people gasping in the dark, and Navith watched her face, and saw the thing the physician had come, over 9 days, to understand was the truest thing about humans. Not the power was only strange. The truest thing was the coldness that came over her now, the way the fear and the wanting and the 11,000 screaming voices all went quiet in her, all got set down, so that the only thing left in her flat, ordinary face was the work. Hold the hitch first, she said. Restart second, screaming last. Yeah, Chief, I can do that. She closed her eyes, opened me up. Rithka opened her up. The restart fought them for 51 minutes. Navith kept the count the whole time, because keeping the count was the only useful thing a physician could do with its hands, while an engineer and a human held 11,000 lives between them, and it wrote the numbers down in the flat, luminous hush of the keel gallery with Mara Voss standing at the rail, both hands out now, palms open, her whole small, burned body gone rigid with the doubled work. The core on one side, the restart on the other. The chief's voice a low, steady thread in her ear, shaping, pulling, easing, and the girl's breath coming slower and deeper and further apart as the reserve came down. Navith watched the reserve come down and understood, around the 40th minute, that they had misjudged. Not badly, not fatally. But the deep store that did not refill from a warm room was falling faster than it had fallen in any of the 9 days' measurements, and the physician saw why, and cursed itself in the quiet, formal way of its people for not seeing it sooner. It was the doubling. Holding the hitch cost her something. Feeding the restart cost her something. But doing both at once, splitting herself between two draws, cost her more than the sum of the two, because the splitting was itself work, the holding of two rhythms that did not want to be held by one body, and that third cost had not been in any of Navith's figures because there had never before been a reason to split her. "Chief," Navith said, very level, "how much longer?" 10 minutes. The cascade is nearly clear." "Why?" "Because in 10 minutes I am going to tell her to stop whether the restart is finished or not," Navith said, "and I want you to have the plant ready to hold itself when I do. She is spending the deep store at a rate I have not seen. She has the 10 minutes. She does not have 11. Do you understand me, Chief?" A pause on the comm. Then, "I understand you. 9 minutes. Voss, 9 minutes and you are done," the physician says, and the physician is right, so we finish this in 9. "Give me the pump bank on the third section. Gently. We are almost through the screaming." "Almost through the screaming," Mara repeated from very far away, and gave the chief the pump bank on the third section. She finished the restart in 8. The environmental plant came up across all 4 sections and held itself, the pumps catching, the air beginning to move again through 11,000 dark rooms, and on the low mid-tiers people who had been breathing thin hot air in the dark for the better part of an hour felt the first cool draft come out of the vents and did not know, most of them, would never know, that it had come out of a girl standing at the keel gallery rail with her reserve run down to a figure that made her physician's fingertips dim with dread. Rithka closed the governors. The double draw ended, and Mara Voss took her hands off the rail and swayed, and Navith was already there. "I'm all right," Mara said. Her voice was a thread. "You are not all right," Navith said, catching her, easing her down against the warm armor of the core she had just spent herself to keep alive. "You are the furthest thing from all right I have permitted you to become, and it will not happen again because I did not count carefully enough, and that is my failure, and I will not repeat it. Sit. Breathe. You are down to a figure I do not like, and you will not touch the core or anything else for a day, and you will not argue with me because you asked me to count, and this is the count telling you to stop." Its instruments were all over her, heart laboring but steady. Heat low, too low. She was cold to the touch now, the human furnace banked down near its coals. The deep store at a number Navith had not seen and did not want to see again. "You did the thing," the physician said more gently. 11,000, the plant is holding. You did the thing, now let me do mine." Mara let it. That was how the physician knew how far down she was, that she let it, without a word, and closed her eyes against the armor, and let the chief and the physician carry her back to the ward, the long, ugly way through the maintenance passages, so the tears would not see the lightning girl carried out on her feet by 2 aliens, spent to the coals for 11,000 people who would wake in the morning to moving air and never know the price. She slept for 19 hours. Navith sat with her for most of them and watched the deep store climb, slowly, more slowly than it had climbed in the first days, and did a sum it did not share with anyone, and put the sum in the private log where it kept the things it was not yet ready to be certain of. The sum was this. She was not refilling the way she had. The deep store came back, but a little less each time and a little slower, and the physician, who had tended the dying of 9 species and knew the shape of a resource being spent toward its end, wrote in its private log the thing it had known since the dead ward and had not let itself say. Whatever Mara Voss had become, it was not without a bottom. She was an accumulator, not a spring. She held a great deal and she gave a great deal, and the giving came out of a store that was large but finite, and every crisis spent a little of it that the warm air of a room could not entirely buy back. And if the crises kept coming, and on a dying station the crises always kept coming, then there was a day, calculable, distant but calculable, when the lightning girl would go to the core and find that she had nothing left to hold it with. Navith did the calculation, and then it did the other calculation, the one about the core itself, the resonance in the third quarter that was wearing worse each week, and it set the two numbers beside each other the way it had set the impossible gauges beside each other on the first night, and it saw that they were racing. The core's dying and the girl's emptying, and it could not, from where it sat, tell which line reached the bottom first. Rithka brought the worst news 4 days later, in the Kiel Gallery, with Mara rested and back on her feet, and the overseer, unexpectedly, standing at the rail beside them. Sorth had changed in the 2 weeks, and the change was the kind that a Viharn would rather have died than admit to, so he did not admit to it, and behaved instead as though he had always intended to be exactly where he now was. He had not gone back to the inner holdings. He had told the Combine, in dispatches Rithka had helped him word, that Coralt anchorage was no longer a total loss, but a live operation of unprecedented value requiring his personal supervision. And the Combine, which understood the words value and unprecedented far better than it understood the words 38,000 people, had left him aboard and begun, grudgingly, to fund the burns. He had taken to appearing in the Kiel Gallery. He did not help. There was nothing a liquidation officer could do to help hold a core, but he watched, and he had begun, Navith noticed, to ask questions that were not about the asset, and to learn the answers, and to smell the station a little less. "Say it plainly, Chief," Sorth said now. "You have the face of a creature with a number it dislikes." "I have become familiar with the face. Say it." Rithka set its instrument slate on the rail. "The third quarter resonance is accelerating," it said. "I have been measuring it since before the girl came. It has always worn worse over time, but the wear has been slow and steady for a year. In the last 2 weeks it has begun to wear faster. Not because of anything we did, the girl's holding is the only thing that has slowed it at all. It is simply reaching the end of its own decline, the way a bearing reaches the end. And here is the number I dislike." It brought the figure up on the slate. "The station-keeping burn. Our orbit over Asara sags into the radiation belt a little each pass, and every so often the core makes a burn to lift us back out. The last burn was 14 months ago. On the old schedule, the next was due in perhaps a year, and I had hoped by then to have, I do not know what I had hoped, salvage, a miracle, but the belt has been more active than the schedule assumed, and the orbit has decayed faster than the schedule assumed, and with the resonance accelerating, I no longer trust the core to make a burn at all past a certain point." The chief's mandibles were very still. "We do not have a year. By my numbers, we have between 3 and 5 weeks before the orbit requires a burn the core cannot safely make. If we miss that burn, the next window is worse, and the one after that does not come, because by then we are too deep in the belt and falling." The Kiel Gallery was quiet. Far down the spine, the core pulsed and hitched, and caught itself with the small daily death Rithka had been listening to for a year. "How large a burn?" Mara said. Rithka told her. It was, Navith understood, watching the number land, an enormous figure, not a section restart, not a tier's load, not the steady patient work of holding a hitch. It was the whole station's mass, lifted against a gas giant's pull in a single sustained push, and the chief slate laid it out beside the figure of what the failing core could safely deliver, and the two figures did not meet. There was a gap between them. And everyone at the rail understood, without anyone saying it, whose body the chief proposed to lay across the gap. "Can she make it up?" Sorth said. He did not say it cruelly. That was the thing Navith marked and put in its long private accounting of the overseer, that he asked the question the way the chief asked it, as a creature that had learned the room, not as a creature counting an asset. The difference between what the core delivers and what the burn requires. Can she feed the gap the way she feeds the restarts? She can feed a gap, Rithka said. She has fed gaps. But the restart was 50 minutes and it nearly emptied her, and it was a section, and this is the station. A burn is not 50 minutes of gentle holding. It is a sustained maximum push for as long as the burn runs, at a rate that dwarfs anything we have asked of her, into a core that will be fighting her the whole time because the core will be at the edge of its own failure making the burn. The chief looked at Mara, and for once the flat engineer's control cracked, just slightly, just enough for Navith to see the thing underneath it. I do not know if she can make it up, Overseer. I know that if she tries and the deep store runs out in the middle of the burn, the core skips at maximum load and the burn fails and we fall. And I know that if she does make it up, it did not finish. If she makes it up, Navith said, because a physician does not let a mercy silence stand where a truth is needed, I do not know what is left of her afterward. I have been measuring the deep store. It does not refill as it did. A burn of this size would spend more of it at once than everything else she has done combined, and it would spend it at the very edge, and I cannot tell you, Chief Overseer, I cannot tell you that she comes back from that. I can tell you she is the only thing on this wheel that could do it. I cannot tell you she survives having done it. Those are the two true things, and I will not soften either one. They stood at the rail. Asara turned below, banded and vast and patient, waiting the way a gravity well waits, without malice and without mercy, for the wheel to sag close enough to take. Mara Voss looked down at the gas giant that had been going to eat her whole life, and then she looked at the three of them, the chief who had counted, the physician who had counted, the overseer who had come in his ugly way to stand at the rail instead of signing the room off, and she was quiet for a while, and when she spoke she did not sound afraid, and she did not sound brave, which Navith had learned were two different things, and that the second was the dangerous one. 3 to 5 weeks, she said, so we've got time to do it right, good. She put her hand on the warm armor of the core. Chief, I want every number you've got. The burn, the gap, the core's real limits, my real limits, all of it, on the table. No mercy silences, physician, you hear me? I want the true numbers, even the ugly ones. Because if I'm going to lay across that gap, I'm not doing it blind, and I'm not doing it brave. I'm doing it counted. We've got 3 weeks to figure out exactly how to spend me so that the burn lands and there's something left over at the end. And if the numbers say there's no way to do that, she looked at each of them, then we'll have 3 weeks to figure out something else. But we don't get to the something else by pretending the burn isn't coming. So put it all on the table. Let's count. She went to find Delgo's harness and left the 3 aliens standing at the rail over the turning giant. And it was Sareth of all of them who broke the silence in a voice that had lost, somewhere in 2 weeks, the polish it had come aboard with. I have signed off a great many stations, the overseer said, to no one in particular, watching the girl go. I was good at it. I never once wondered whether I had signed off the wrong one. His crest was low, but not in the way of a creature doing sums it disliked. In some other way Navith had not seen on him before. Chief, physician, whatever it costs to keep her counted, whatever the Combine will not fund, bring the figure to me. I find I have a personal account. I did not expect to spend it here. And he went out after her, the overseer of the reclamation, to learn the true numbers of the station he had come to bury. The Kesu called Dreeth had been muscle for the Combine for 20 years, and in all that time it had never lost sleep over a contract, and it lost sleep over Korald. It was not the girl's power that did it. Dreeth had seen power. It had stood security on a mining moon when a containment failed and watched a plasma front take a whole shift of workers in the time it took to blink, and it knew what raw energy did to bodies, and a human who carried a substation's worth of it in her chest was, to Dreeth's professional eye, simply a hazard to be stood well back from. That part it understood. That part let it sleep. What kept it awake was the ration line. Dreeth had drawn the standing post on the keel gallery approach. The overseer wanted the concession security visible now that the station knew what it had, and Dreeth was the visible one, big and yellow-eyed and armored, planted at the approach where the low tiers came and went. And it had watched the girl day after day take the long, ugly maintenance route to avoid the tiers, and it had watched the tiers wait for her anyway, not to mob her, not to beg. Dreeth had stood security on stations where the desperate mobbed and begged and knew that sound, and this was not that sound. They waited to give her things. A better jacket once, folded and left where she'd find it, no name on it. Coffee, real coffee from somewhere, kept hot. A child's drawing of a wheel with a small figure at the center of it, and a scatter of yellow marks that Dreeth understood after a moment were meant to be light. Dreeth had run the numbers the way its profession taught it to run numbers. 38,000 people, 4,000 lifeboat berths, which meant that every soul in that ration line knew with the flat certainty of the doomed that if the wheel fell they were not on a boat, and they left a jacket. They kept coffee hot. They drew a wheel with a light at the center and gave it to the girl who was the only reason the wheel had not yet fallen, and they did it not as payment. The girl took nothing, thanked no one, ducked the whole business through the maintenance passages, but as the only thing a person can do for someone carrying a load too big to help carry. They fed her and clothed her, and told her, in the only currency the low tiers had, that they saw her. On the mining moon, when the containment failed, Dreeth had watched the surviving shift trample 3 of their own getting to the shelters. That was people. Dreeth had believed that was people, bedrock, the thing under all the contracts for 20 years. Get to the boat, take the berth, trample what you have to. And here was a station full of the unboated, the ones with no berth to trample toward. And instead of turning on each other in the long dying, they had turned toward one small burned girl and started leaving her coffee. And Dreeth did not have a professional category for it, and the absence of the category was the thing that kept it awake. It said as much once to the other Casu on the post in the low clicking undertone of its people. You feel it, on this wheel. You felt it. I've felt it, the other one said. Neither of them looked at the ration line. I stood aside for her in the harbor master's suite when the overseer wanted us to take her. A pause. I've never stood aside from a contract in my life. I did it before I decided to. My body did it. The click of unease. What are they, Dreeth? The humans. I've read the survey. Ember grade beyond return. I always read that as a warning about the world. It is a warning, Dreeth said, watching the girl come up the long way, alone, ducking the tears that loved her. I just don't think it's about the world. They spent the first week of the 3 doing the thing Mara had asked for, which was counting. Rithka built a model of the burn, the whole station's mass, the pull of Asara, the core's failing output, the gap between them, and Navith built a model of the girl, the deep store and its rate of spending and its slowing return, and they laid the 2 models side by side in the keel gallery and argued over them the way 2 careful creatures argue when the thing they are modeling is a life. The chief wanted to shape the burn so the core carried as much of the load as it safely could, and Mara filled only the gap. The physician wanted to know exactly how wide the gap would be at the burn's worst moment, because that moment, the peak, when the station's mass fought hardest against the giant's pull, was where the deep store would drain fastest, and the peak was where Mara would either have enough or not. Mara sat in on all of it. She had a rigger's head for a load model, and she caught 2 errors in the chief's math in the first days, small ones, but the kind that mattered. And after that the chief stopped treating the model as its own and started treating it as theirs. She learned the burn the way she had learned every section she ever ran, until she could feel the shape of it, the long climb to the peak and the fall away after, until she could have described from the inside exactly where in the burn she would begin to hurt and exactly where she would begin to empty. And in the second week they began, carefully, to prepare her to hold more than she ever had. This was Navith's idea, and Navith hated it, which was how the physician knew it was probably right. If the deep store had a bottom, then the way through the burn was not to spend less. The burn required what it required, but to arrive at the burn with more, to fill her fuller than she had ever been filled, so that even a maximal spend left something in the bottom of the store. And a human accumulator filled from the ambient of a room slowly. But a human accumulator could also be filled, Rithka pointed out, from a source. From the core itself, in the off hours, in the direction opposite to holding, the core feeding her instead of her feeding the core, topping the deep store up past its natural fill, banking her like a cell against the day of the burn. So they banked her. It was slow and it was strange, and Navith watched every hour of it with its instruments on her, because filling a human past her natural fill was as far off the map as everything else about her, and there was no telling where her own top of the scale lay any more than there had been in the dead ward. She took the fill. The deep store climbed past where it had ever been, and Mara reported it as a pressure, a fullness behind the breastbone that was not painful but was constant, the banked charge sitting in her like a held breath. And Navith measured her and found nothing failing and wrote in its log that the girl now carried, sleeping and waking, more stored energy than the emergency reserves of the entire habitable ring, and that she carried it the way a person carries a thing they have decided not to be afraid of. It was in the third week that the Combine answered. The dispatch came in on the command tier's old receiver, coded to Sareth's authority, and Sareth read it alone in the harbor master's suite and then sent for the three of them. And when they came, he did not stand against the light with his crest high. He sat at the stone desk with the dispatch on it and his crest low, and he told them plainly, because he had learned plainness in 3 weeks, what the Combine had decided. They have understood the asset, he said. That is the trouble. I told them Coral was a live operation of unprecedented value, and I told them why, because I had to tell them why to get the funding, and now they have understood the why better than I intended. He turned the slate so they could read it. The Combine does not fund the station-keeping burn. The Combine has reviewed the chief's own numbers, the ones I forwarded, the ones that show the burn is marginal, that the core may fail, that the asset may not survive the attempt. And the Combine has concluded, correctly by its own arithmetic, that the sensible course is not to risk a priceless asset on a doomed station. They are sending a recovery vessel. It arrives in 9 days. Its instructions are to extract Mara Voss, the asset, and to formally abandon Coral Anchorage and its population to the orbit. They are not evacuating the station. They are evacuating her. One body. They have decided she is worth more than the wheel, and they are not entirely wrong about the arithmetic, and I, the overseer, stopped. I am instructed to prepare her for transfer and to place the station under abandonment protocol. My signature, again. The Keel Gallery model had said 3 to 5 weeks. It had now been just under 3. The recovery vessel arrived in 9 days. Rithka did the sum out loud because someone had to. The burn window opens in 11 days at the earliest, the chief said. The recovery vessel arrives in 9. They have timed it. They intend to have her off the station before the burn is even possible so that no one aboard can argue that she might have saved it. If she is gone, the station simply falls, and the falling is no one's fault. It is only arithmetic, and the asset is safe in the inner holdings being studied. Its mandibles worked. It is very clean. I will say that for the Combine. It is the cleanest murder of 38,000 people I have ever seen drawn up on a slate. They can't take her if she won't go, Sareth said. I have learned that much. No one takes her anywhere she does not agree to go. I stood in that dead ward with my hand half raised, and I learned it in my hide. He looked at Mara. But they will not need to take you by force, Miss Voss, and they know it, because they will make you the same offer I made you, only real and worse. They will land, and they will tell you that the burn is marginal, which is true, that you may die making it, which is true, that the station may fall anyway even if you spend yourself entirely, which, chief, is it true? It is possible, Rithka said. The burn is marginal. That is the honest word. It is not a certainty either way. Which is true, Sareth went on quietly. And then they will offer you your life. They will say, Come with us live, be cared for, and yes, the station falls, but the station was always going to fall, and at least you are alive, and your death would not have been a certain purchase. You might have spent yourself and saved no one. And that offer, Miss Voss, is a harder one than mine, because mine was a lie dressed as arithmetic, and theirs is arithmetic dressed as mercy. And I do not know what you will say to it. I truly do not. I have watched you for 3 weeks, and I cannot tell you what you will do when a cold voice offers you your life at the price of everyone else's, and tells you truthfully that their deaths might not even buy anything. He folded his 4 fingers. I only wanted you to hear it from me first, so that when the assessor says it, you have heard it already, and it does not catch you fresh. Mara had gone to the rail while he spoke, the way she did, and put her hand on the warm armor. She stood like that for a while, and Navith watched the deep store's steady banked pressure in its instruments, and watched her face, and could not tell, either, what she would say, and found that the not knowing frightened the physician more than any number ever had. An assessor, Mara said finally. 4-armed scholarly type, Ilvini. Ilvini, Soreth confirmed. Assessor caste. They do not run stations, they price things. She is coming to price you and to price the 38,000 and to find correctly that you are worth more. That is what an assessor does. It is very good at it. Yeah, Mara said. I bet it is. She took her hand off the wall. 9 days, and the burn window opens in 11. She turned around, and her flat, ordinary face had the thing on it that Navith had seen the night of the restart, the coldness that was the work getting clear of the fear. And the physician understood that whatever the girl had decided, she had decided it already, standing at the rail with her hand on the core, and that the deciding had not taken her long. Then we've got a problem with the schedule, don't we, Chief? That 11-day window, that's the earliest it opens. What's the earliest the orbit forces it, not the safe burn they have to burn? If the belt kicks up, if the resonance goes early, what's the real floor? Rithka went very still. You are asking me the wrong question, Voss. I'm asking you the right question, Chief. I just don't think you want to answer it. She held its faceted eyes. The recovery ship gets here in 9 days. If the burn can't happen till 11, they win, they take me off and the wheel falls and it's nobody's fault. Unless the burn happens before they get here. So I'm asking, if the belt kicks up early, if that resonance you've been listening to for a year finally lets go, how early could this thing force us to burn? The chief did not want to answer. Navith could see it not wanting to. But it had spent 3 weeks learning that this girl asked to be counted and honored the count, and that a mercy silence was the one thing she would not forgive. And so it answered, in the flat voice of a creature laying down a true and terrible number. Any day, Rithka said. The floor is any day, Voss. The resonance is at the end of its decline. The belt has been active. I have been telling you 3 to 5 weeks because that is the schedule, but a bearing at the end does not fail on a schedule. It fails when it fails, and if it fails early, the orbit forces a burn early, ready or not, ship or no ship. The floor is not 11 days. The floor is now. I have simply not said it, because there is nothing to be done about now, and a station that knows. Dies faster. Yeah, you keep saying that. Mara almost smiled. It was not a warm thing. Except this station's not going to die at all, Chief, so I don't think the rule holds. She looked at the 3 of them. Bank me full, tonight. All the way up, whatever the top of my scale is, we find it tonight because I'm not getting caught half-charged when that bearing lets go. Physician, you fight me on it, I get it, but the math changed the second that ship launched. I'd rather be dangerously full and ready than safely half-empty, and 9 days from watching them fly me off, while the wheel falls behind us. Chief, you keep your hand on that resonance every hour, and the second it starts to go you get me on the core, day or night, ready or not. And overseer, she looked at Soreth, when that assessor lands you let me talk to it. You don't sign anything, you don't fight it. You just get me in the room. I've got some counting to do with it. She went to bank herself full, and Navith went with her, because that was the job. And behind them, Overseer Soreth sat at the stone desk with the Combine's clean dispatch in front of him, and did not sign it. and Chief Rithka went down the long keel gallery to put its hands on the armor over the place where the Corps' old heart skipped, to listen, hour by hour, for the moment the bearing at the end of its decline would finally, quietly, let go. It let go 4 days early. Rithka felt it go before any instrument did. The chief had slept on the keel gallery for 4 nights in the working crouch of its people, one hand always on the armor, and on the 5th night, 5 days still before the recovery vessel was due, 6 before the burn window was supposed to open, it woke because the pulse under its hand had changed. Not the skip. The skip it knew, had known for a year, the small daily death in the 3rd quarter. This was under the skip. This was the bearing itself, the deep resonance that held the Corps' rhythm together, and it had begun, in the dead middle of the 3rd watch, to slide. The chief was moving before it was fully awake. It slapped the gallery alarm, and its own voice went out over every comm on the station at once, flat and fast and stripped of everything but the work. Burn stations. This is not a drill. The Corps is losing its rhythm, and the orbit will force a burn within the hour. Burn stations. Physician, get her on the Corps. Get her on the Corps now. Navith had the girl awake and in Delgo's harness in 90 seconds. It had rehearsed this. They had all rehearsed this. In the way you rehearse the thing you pray does not come, and the rehearsal held. Mara came up out of sleep already cold and already clear, the fear getting out of the way of the work before she was even on her feet, and she went down the maintenance passage to the keel gallery at a dead run with the physician beside her, banked full, carrying more stored fire than the whole habitable ring, and she did not say a word the entire way, because there was nothing to say that the counting had not already said. Overseer Soreth met them at the gallery mouth. He had not slept either. He had a slate in one hand with the abandonment protocol on it, unsigned, and he did not have it in his hand because he meant to sign it. He had it because he had been sitting with it every night. Navith understood now, the way a creature sits with the thing it has decided not to do to remind itself of the deciding. The recovery vessel has gone to full burn, he said. They heard the alarm relayed. They are trying to reach us before you make the burn. They will not. They are 5 days out and the burn is an hour off. Whatever happens on this Corps in the next hour happens with no one watching but us. He stepped aside to let her pass, and then, in a voice Navith had not heard from him, added, Miss Voss, if there is a version of this where you do not spend the bottom of the store, where you feed the gap and let the wheel take the risk it was always going to take, I would think no less. There isn't, Overseer. Mara didn't slow. You know there isn't. You did the math same as me. She went past him onto the gallery, to the rail, to the warm armor over the failing heart of the station, and put both hands flat against it, and closed her eyes, and Navith came up on one side of her with its instruments and Rithka on the other with the governors, and the 3 of them settled into the places they had rehearsed, over the turning face of Asara, in the last hour of the wheel's long dying, and got ready to spend the girl. Talk to me, Chief, Mara said. Where are we? The bearing is sliding, Rithka said. Its 4 hands were flying over the governor bank, and its voice had the terrible steadiness again, the steadiness that costs something to hold. The Corps will make the burn, it has that much left in it, but it cannot hold its own rhythm while it does, not with the bearing going. So here is the shape of it, Voss, and it is worse than the model because the model assumed the Corps kept its rhythm and it will not. You are not just filling the gap now. You are holding the rhythm too. The thing you have been doing at the hitch, 4 hours a shift, you will do that at maximum for the whole burn and feed the gap at the same time and both at the peak. It is the restart doubled and doubled again, and it will last longer than the restart, and I will not lie to you about what that is. A pause. It is everything you have, all of it. If the model is right, you finish the burn with the bottom of the store scraped bare and nothing over. If the model is wrong in the direction I fear, you run out before the peak and the Corps skips at maximum load and we fall. I've got it, Chief. Her voice had gone to the faraway place. When does it start? The orbit forces the burn in, Rithka checked. 50 minutes. but the bearing may not give us 50. If it slides faster, I bring the burn forward and you go early. Physician, last word, is she ready? Navith looked at its instruments. The deep store sat at the top of a scale that no longer meant anything, banked fuller than any living thing the physician had ever measured, a held breath of fire behind the girl's breastbone. Her heart was steady. Her heat was up, the human furnace stoked high, running hot the way an ember-grayed body ran when it meant to spend. Every number was as good as a number could be for a thing about to attempt what no number had ever described. And the physician understood that ready was not the word, that there was no word, that it was being asked to certify a girl for a thing its whole careful science could not model. And it did the thing it had learned from her over 5 weeks, which was to set the fear down and say the true thing flatly. She is as ready as she will ever be, Navith said. And I will be counting every second, and the second the store hits the floor I will say her name, and when I say her name, Chief, you close the governors whether the burn is done or not, because I will not watch her scrape past the bottom of herself for a wheel. Those are my terms. She spins to the floor, not past it. If the floor is not enough, the physician's fingertips dimmed. Then it is not enough and we fall, having not murdered the girl to fail. That is the count. Voss, do you accept the count? Mara was quiet a moment, both hands on the warm armor, feeling the great sick slide of the bearing under her palms, the station's heart losing its hold on its own rhythm. No, she said. The gallery went still. I don't accept the count, physician. Her voice was flat and far and entirely calm. Not that one, because you built that count to save me and I love you for it, I do, but you built it around the wrong number. You set the floor where I stopped being safe. But I didn't come out here to be safe. I came out here to hold 38,000 people off a gas giant, and if the floor's not enough, then the floor's not where I stop. I stop where the burn's done, or I stop where there's nothing left. And those had better be the same place, because I've done the math too, and I banked myself higher than you wanted for exactly this. And I am not going to feel the wheel start to fall through my hands and stop, because a number said I'd had enough. She opened her eyes and looked at the physician, and there was nothing cruel in it and nothing brave in it, only the flat, cold certainty of a rigger who has read the section and knows what the section costs. You count. You count the whole way down. You tell me every number, even past the floor, especially past the floor, because I want to know exactly what I'm spending. But you don't stop me at the floor. That's not the count I accept. The count I accept is, the burn lands. Everything else is just where my body happens to be when it does. Navith looked at the girl for a long moment. In 11 years on Koralt, it had signed a great many careful, honest reports, and it had spent 5 weeks learning that the truest thing about humans was not the fire they carried, but the way they decided where to spend it, coldly, without anger, without grandeur, the way you decide anything you have already decided. And the physician understood that it could refuse, could keep its hand on its own terms, could make Rithkak close the governors at the floor, and that if it did, the girl would know and would never forgive it, and the wheel would very likely fall. And it understood, too, that this was what she had been telling it since the dead ward, in the flat, patient voice, that she was not asking permission to be spent. She was asking to be counted while she spent herself. Those were different things, and the physician had 5 weeks of learning the difference, and it made the choice a physician is never supposed to make, and made it the way she had taught it, flatly, without grandeur. I count the whole way down, Navith said, past the floor, every number, and I do not stop you. It said its instruments. Asara, take me, girl, all right, I count. Thank you, Myra said, and closed her eyes, and put her whole self against the warm armor. The bearing did not give them 50 minutes. It gave them 19. Now, Rithkak said, low and terrible, its hands closing on the governors. The orbit is at the edge and the bearing will not hold longer. Voss, the core is yours. Hold the rhythm. I open the burn on your word. Say when you have the rhythm. Mara reached into the failing heart of the station, with the thing the alien doctors had built, and her own biology had turned into a furnace. And Navith watched the deep store begin at last to pour out of her, and heard her find the core's staggering rhythm the way she had found the hitch on the first day, except that now the whole spine was losing its hold, and she put her shoulder under all of it at once, the entire 40 kilometers of dying fusion heart, and held it, and made it beat true. "I've got the rhythm," she said from the far country in a voice gone thin and even. "Open the burn." Rithka opened the burn. The whole wheel felt the burn begin. Down on the low tiers in the human enclave, a woman named Sela Voss, no relation the records could trace, though on a station that old every human was some kind of cousin, held her 6-year-old against her in the dark of their compartment and felt the deck begin to push. Not shake, push. A long, low building pressure that came up through the plating and leaned the whole world gently to one side, the way it did when the station made a burn, except that she had lived aboard 40 years and had never felt a burn like this one, so long, so steady, going on and on past the point where a burn should have cut out. The comm had said burn stations. The comm had said the lightning girl was on the core. Sela held her child, who was not afraid because children on dying stations learn early to read whether their mothers are afraid, and Sela was doing everything in her power not to be. And she pressed her hand flat to the pushing deck and thought, without knowing she thought it, of the girl who had put a star in her child's palm and said it just wants somewhere to go, and she prayed to nothing in particular that the somewhere would hold. On the keel gallery, Navith counted. "Store at 90, it said, flat, even, the voice it had promised her. "Rhythm holding. Chief, she has the core's rhythm. It is beating true, cleaner than I have heard it. The burn is climbing." "Store at 86. "Burn is climbing clean," Rithka answered, hands flying. "Thrust building toward the peak. We are lifting, Voss. The orbit is lifting. Hold the rhythm and feed the gap as it opens. It opens slowly now. It opens fast at the peak. Store at 80, Navith said. 80, she is spending steady. This is the model, so far this is the model." Mara heard them from very far away. She was not, in any sense she could have explained, in the keel gallery any more. She was in the core spread down the length of it, 40 kilometers of failing fire, her whole self poured out along the staggering spine, holding its rhythm true the way you hold a load off a bad hoist, except the load was the heartbeat of a machine the size of a small city and the hoist was her own body, and the drop, if she let it drop, was 38,000 people into a gas giant's clouds. She held it. She had always been able to feel where the power wanted to go. Now she was the place it wanted to go, and she told it gently, steadily, where to go instead. Up. Lift the wheel. Lift it off the edge. She felt the burn climb and she fed it, and she felt the gap between what the core could give and what the burn demanded begin slowly to open under her like a mouth. "Store at 70, Navith counted. The gap is opening, she is filling it. Store at 66, 62. The peak was still minutes off. That was the thing the model had made brutally clear and the thing that had kept Navith awake for a week. The burn did not demand the most at the start. It demanded the most at the peak, when the station's whole mass fought hardest against Asara's pull and the peak came near the end, when the store would already be low. She would arrive at the hardest moment with the least left. That was the shape of it. That was where the floor lived. 55, Navith counted. 50, Chief, how far to the peak? 4 minutes to peak. She will not have 50% at the peak, Navith said, flat, even counting. She will be near the floor at the peak. This is the model. Voss, do you hear me? You are at 50 and falling and the hardest part is 4 minutes off. Ease nothing, hold everything 4 minutes. 4 minutes, Mara said from the far country. Her voice had gone to almost nothing. I hear you, keep counting. The burn climbed. The wheel lifted. And down its length the old core beat true for the first time in a year, held true by the girl poured out along its spine, and made the burn it could not have made alone, and the two things that had been racing since the first night in the dead ward, the core's dying and the girl's emptying, came, at last, to the place where they crossed. 40, Navith counted. 36, 2 minutes to peak. 30. Voss, you are at 30 and falling and the peak is not here. 28. I feel it, Mara breathed. I feel the peak coming. It's chief, it's bigger than the model, the gap. It's opening wider than the model said. Rithka's hand stopped for half a second and then flew faster. The bearing, it said, and its terrible steadiness cracked at last just at the edge. The bearing is worse than the model, it is taking more of the rhythm from you than we planned, so you are spending more to hold it and the gap is wider because the core is giving less. Voss, the model is wrong in the direction I feared. You are going to reach the floor before the peak. Physician. 20, Navith counted, flat, even, the promise held. 20, 18. The peak is 90 seconds off and she is at 18, 15. Voss, this is the floor. This is the number I built the floor at. You are at the floor and the peak is not here and I am counting past it because you told me to. 14, 13. Keep counting, Mara said. It was barely a voice at all. Sela Voss, down in the dark of the low tiers, felt the push reach its hardest, felt the whole world lean and strain and the plating groan around her, and held her child and did not pray now to nothing in particular but to the girl herself. Wherever she was, hold on, hold on, hold on. 10, Navith counted, and its flat, even voice did the hardest thing it had ever done, which was to stay flat and even. 9. The peak is 30 seconds off. She is at 9 and falling and there is no more bank store past this. Chief, this is the bottom I banked her to. Past this there is nothing but her. Past this she is spending herself. 8, 7. At the bottom of the store, in the last of the banked fire, Mara Voss felt the peak arrive. It came up under her like the crest of a wave. The moment the whole wheel's mass fought Asara hardest, the widest the gap would ever open, the most the burn would ever demand. And she was at 7% and there was nothing banked below her, and the core's rhythm was pulling at her to hold it, and the gap was a mouth wide open and screaming for more than she had left. And she understood in the cold far country where the work lived, that this was the place, not the floor Navith had built. The real floor, the place where the girl ran out. And she did the thing she had been telling them all, flatly, since the dead ward that she would do. She reached past it. There was nothing banked below 7, so she spent the thing under the store, the furnace itself, the human heart of her, the ember-grade fire that ran her own body hot, the reserve that was not a reserve because it was never meant to be spent, the last coals a body keeps to keep itself alive. She reached down into the part of herself that a careful physician would have died before touching, the part that was not stored energy but simply her, and she fed it into the gap, and the core did not skip, and the burn did not fail, and the peak crested, and the wheel came up off the edge. She's past the store, Navith said, and for the first time in 5 weeks the physician's voice was not flat. Chief, she is past the store, she is spending her own heat, her core temperature is falling. She is burning herself for the burn, the peak, Chief, is the peak past? The peak is passing, Rithka said. The peak is passing. The wheel is lifting off the edge, thrust falling from peak. The gap is closing, Voss. The gap is closing, you do not have to hold the whole of it anymore. Ease off, the peak is past. But Mara Voss was very far away now, past the far country in a place with no numbers in it at all, and she held the rhythm true and fed the closing gap out of the last coals of herself, and did not ease off, because from where she was she could not any longer hear them, could not hear anything but the great slow heartbeat of the machine she had become, beating true, lifting the wheel, and she stayed with it down the long fall from the peak the way you stay with a load until it is set down, all the way. To the end until the burn cut out. The burn cut out. The wheel was up. The orbit was lifted, clear of the belt, clear of the edge, 38,000 people carried up off the arithmetic on the back of a single burn that no dying core could have made alone. Down in the low tiers the terrible push eased and the world came level, and Sela Voss let out a breath she had held for 4 minutes and felt her child ask, into the sudden quiet, whether it was over, and told it, yes, baby, it's over, we're up, and did not yet know the price, because no one on the low tiers ever knew the price. That was the whole shape of it. That was the thing the girl had built her holding out of. On the keel gallery, the core beat once true, on its own. And then the girl's hands came off the warm armor, and she folded down against it without a sound, and every gauge Navith had on her went to the dead line at once. Navith had her flat on the gallery deck before she finished folding, and for the next several hours the physician did the only work it had ever truly trusted itself to do. She was cold. That was the thing the physician had feared without a name for it, and now it had the name, and the name was worse than the fear. She had spent past the store, into the furnace, into the heat that kept the body itself alive, and her core temperature was falling like a stone down a well. The deep store read dead, not low, dead, the needle flat against the pin, and that the physician could have borne, because the store had read dead before and filled from the air. But the heat was the body. When the heat went, the girl went, and the girl's heat was going, and there was no warm room in the galaxy that would give it back fast enough. So Navith did not try to fill the store. It let the store lie dead. It fought for the heat instead, the way it had been trained across 9 species and 100 deathbeds, warm fluids, warm air, the slow, patient war against the cold that a physician wages with its whole body when the machines are not enough. And it called Rithka off the governors and put the chief's 4 warm hands on the girl to hold what heat she had. And it called for the enclave, for humans, for bodies that ran hot like hers. And 3 riggers from Delgo's old crew came at a run and lay down on the cold deck of the keel gallery, and put their own furnace-warm bodies against the girl who had spent hers for the wheel, and gave her back, degree by degree, the thing she had burned to make the burn. It took most of a day. Navith did not leave her for any of it. There was a moment near the middle, the lowest moment, when the girl's laboring heart lost its rhythm the way the core had lost its rhythm, and stuttered, and the physician put its luminous 6-fingered hands on her chest, and held the rhythm for her the way she had held the rhythm for the core, and thought, in the one flash of something other than work it permitted itself in all those hours, that this was a strange and fitting thing, to hold the beat under a body that had held the beat under a machine. And that if the galaxy had any justice in it at all, the girl would feel, even from the far country, that someone was doing for her the exact thing she had done for 38,000 strangers who would never know her name. The heart caught, the rhythm steadied. And slowly over the hours, the warm human bodies and the warm fluids and the physician's refusal to stop won the Cold War degree by degree, and the girl's furnace, banked down almost to the last coal, took the borrowed heat and did the thing an ember-grade body does, which is to burn not much, not at first but enough, a flicker at the bottom of the well and then a little more. By the end of the day, her heat had come off the floor and her heart beat true on its own, and Navith sat back at last on the cold deck among the sleeping riggers, and let its fingertips go dark with an exhaustion it had not permitted itself in 5 weeks, and did not weep, because Sethan do not, but sat in the near country of it for a long while. She woke on the 3rd day. She woke the way she had woken the first time, to the blue of the ward and the smell of coolant, and for a while she just lay there, and Navith, who had not left, watched her surface and did not rush her. When her eyes found the physician, they were clear. "Did it land?" she said. Her voice was a thread, but it was hers. "It landed." Navith leaned close. "The wheel is up, Mara. The orbit is lifted clear of the belt. 38,000 people woke the next morning and made their breakfast and complained about the coffee. You did the thing. You did the whole of it." It paused, because a physician does not let a mercy silence stand. "And I have to tell you what it cost, because you ask me always to tell you, and this is the largest cost yet. Do you want it now, or do you want to rest first?" "Now," Mara said. "Always now, you know that." So Navith told her. It told her that she had spent past the store, into the furnace, into her own life, and that the physician and the chief and 3 of Delgo's riggers had spent a day buying it back. And it told her the thing it had measured in the 2 days since, The thing it had checked and rechecked in the flat, careful way of its people before it would say it aloud. That the deep store was filling again. She was not burned out, not dead as an accumulator. The graft was intact, and her biology still ran hot, and she would fill again from the air of a room as she always had. But not to where she had been. The furnace had been banked too low, too long, and something in the deep store had a smaller top to its scale now than it had before the burn. She would come back. She would hold a great deal, more than any other living thing the physician had measured. But she would not, Navith said, ever again hold what she had held on the day of the burn. She had spent that. It did not come back. She had, in the most literal terms the physician could offer her, poured the miracle into the wheel, and the wheel had kept it, and she would live the rest of her life as a smaller fire than the one that had made the burn. Mara lay and took it in, the way she took everything in causes. So I can still nurse the core, she said. The hitch, Rithgaz resonance. I can still hold that. You can still hold that, easily. For years if you are careful, and I will make you be careful. The station lives, Mara. You did not save it for a day. You lifted it clear of the belt, and you can keep the core beating through the wear, and the chief thinks. The chief has begun to think there may be a real repair possible now, with the Combine's funding. Now that Coralt is not a written loss but a station, a human being carried up off a gas giant with her bare hands. You did not buy them a morning. You bought them a future. The physician's fingertips brightened. But the thing you were at the top of your scale, the accumulator that could run a city entire, that you spent. You will not be that again. I am sorry. I do not know if sorry is the right thing to say. You do not seem to me a creature who would have chosen otherwise, and I did not want to insult you by assuming you grieve a thing you spent on purpose. But I am your physician, and it was a great thing you were, and it is gone, and I wanted you to hear me mark it. Mara was quiet for a while. Then, to Navith's surprise, the corner of her mouth moved, not a smile exactly, but the flat cousin of one, the expression the physician had seen on her the day she told the overseer he had buried the wrong station. Physician, she said, you're marking it like I lost something, but that's not the section we're standing in. You want to know what I actually did? She turned her head on the pillow to look at it. There was a ship coming to take me, to own me. Because I was worth more than the wheel, that's what the assessor was coming to price, right, the thing I was, the city in a body, and I spent it, on purpose, all the way down, so when that ship gets here, the flat cousin of a smile again, there's nothing left to take. I price myself down to a rigger who can nurse a core. The Combine can't own a rigger who nurses a core. There's 100,000 of those. We're not worth the fuel to fly out. I didn't lose the thing they wanted, physician. I spent it somewhere they can't reach. That's not a cost. That's the cleanest bit of counting I ever did in my life. Navith looked at her for a long moment and understood slowly, with the cold late clarity it had learned from her, that the girl had done the math on this too, had done it perhaps, standing at the rail the day the dispatch came, when she had said with her hand on the core that she had some counting to do. She had not only decided to make the burn, she had decided how to make it. She had decided to spend the miracle so completely that the miracle would be beyond recovery, beyond ownership, beyond the reach of any assessor's price. And she had done it in the same motion that lifted the wheel, so that the saving of the 38,000 and the freeing of herself were not two acts but one. One cold, clean cut that solved both problems at once. And she had let them all think, right up to the peak, that she was only being brave. You planned this, the physician said. The spending past the store, you planned it before the burn, not as a sacrifice, as a way out, Mara said. Yeah, the only one I could see. You spend the thing they want so hard that it's gone, and you spend it on the thing you'd have spent it on anyway, so it's not even a waste. I told you I'm not brave, Navith. Brave's when you throw yourself away. I didn't throw anything away. I spent every bit of it exactly where I meant to. 38,000 people up off the arithmetic and me down to something nobody's going to fly across the deep to collect. That's not a sacrifice. She closed her eyes. That's a rigger clearing a fault. The recovery vessel made orbit 2 days later. Assessor Corvallis had priced 311 dying holdings in her career, and she had never once been wrong. And she disliked, with the whole of her scholarly, Ilvany nature, the feeling that had begun to gather in her four hands as the recovery vessel matched Coralt's orbit, and she saw the wheel turning steady and clear, high above the radiation belt, exactly where a written loss was not supposed to be. She had read the file on the transit in. She had read it 4 times in the Ilvany way, once with each hand's attention, and the file was clean. Coralt anchorage, total loss. Keel core pass salvage, orbit decaying into the belt. Population 38,000 of record to be abandoned to the fall. A single anomalous asset, 1 human female, designation VAS, a living accumulator of unprecedented value to be recovered before the station died. It was, Corvallis had thought, an elegant assignment. Extract the priceless, abandon the worthless, close the columns. She was very good at closing columns. It was the whole of what an assessor was. But the wheel was up. The wheel was up and steady, and as the vessel came around its long axis, Corvallis saw the keel gallery lit and working, and saw, through the vessel's glass, the burn scoring on the station's drive vanes that meant a burn had been made, an enormous burn, a whole-mass burn, the kind the file swore the dead core could not make. And she sat with her 4 hands very still and understood that the file was wrong, and assessors did not tolerate a wrong file, and the intolerance of it was the gathering feeling in her hands. Overseer Soreth met her at the transit lock. She knew him by reputation, a competent reclamation officer, a closer of columns like herself, a Viharn of good tier who had never in his career signed off the wrong station. She expected a colleague. She found a Viharn whose good coat still hung on him but who wore it differently. A Viharn who smelled of the station now instead of resenting it, and who greeted her with a courtesy that had something underneath it she could not immediately price. "Assessor," Soreth said, "you've had a wasted transit. I'll walk you through it, and then I imagine you'll want to file an amended assessment, and I'll help you word it, because I've become rather good at wording the amendments this station requires." "The file," Corvallis said, "states a total loss." "The file is 9 days out of date," said Soreth, "which on Coralt is the difference between a corpse and a survivor. Walk with me." He walked her the length of the command tier, and he told her plainly, without grandeur. She noted the without grandeur. It was not how officers reported triumphs, what had happened on the wheel. The human, the graft, the accumulator, the holding of the core, the restart of the mid-tiers. And the burn made 4 days early on a sliding bearing, the whole station's mass lifted clear of the belt on the back of a single body poured out along a failing spine. Corvallis listened with all 4 hands, and did the thing she did, which was to price it as it came, and found, hand over hand, that she could not. "Then the asset performed beyond projection," she said, reaching for the frame that would let her close the column. "That increases its value. My assignment stands. I extract the asset the more so if it is more valuable than the file knew, and the station, having been proven capable of 1 burn, is nonetheless a corpse on a longer clock, and I abandon it per instruction. The arithmetic is unchanged. It is merely larger." Soreth stopped walking. "That's what I'd have said," he told her, 9 days ago. "I want you to know that, assessor, colleague to colleague. 9 days ago I stood where you're standing and I said the exact words. The arithmetic is merely larger. Extract the priceless, abandon the worthless, close the columns." He looked at her with his crest at a low, flat angle that Corvallis read and did not like, because it was not the angle of a creature doing sums it disliked. It was the angle of a creature who had done the sums and come out somewhere an assessor was not supposed to be able to go. "Come and price the asset," he said. "Then tell me the arithmetic is unchanged. I'll wait." They found the human in the keel gallery, because that was where she was most days now, though she was not holding the core when they came. She was sitting at the rail with her burned arm out of its sling, her palm flat against the warm armor, her eyes closed, doing the thing Corvallis' file had no category for, which was listening to a machine with her body. She was small. That was Corvalue's first note, and the assessor made it with a flicker of professional irritation, because the file had prepared her for something vast, and she found instead an ordinary young human in a rigger's patched jacket, dirt on her hands, a healing scald down one side of her jaw, entirely unremarkable, entirely at rest. "Miss Voss," Soreth said, "the assessor has come to price you." Myra opened her eyes. She looked at the four-armed Ilvini in her fine scholar's wrap, and at the recovery vessel's mark on it, and she did not startle, and she did not stand, and Corvalue, who had priced 311 holdings and the desperate creatures that clung to them, registered the absence of fear the way one registers a missing tooth with the tongue, an absence where every instinct said a presence should be. "You're the one who came to take me," Mara said. "It was not a question. Before the burn, so the wheel would fall clean and nobody could say I might have held it." "That was the assignment," Corvalue agreed, because assessors did not lie about assignments. The honesty was the whole of their authority. "You have made it obsolete by making the burn. My assignment now is to price what you have become, which the file rates as more valuable than the station, and to recover it. You," her four hands folded, "I will be direct, as your overseer has been direct. You are the most valuable object I have been sent to recover in my career. The inner holdings will devote extraordinary resources to understanding you. You will be cared for beyond anything this station could offer. And yes, the station will fall eventually on a longer clock, and the 38,000 with it, but that was true before you were born, and it is not your burden to carry. And your death here on a dying wheel would purchase nothing that your life in the holdings cannot purchase better. That is the arithmetic. It is not cruel. It is only true. Will you come?" It was, Navith thought, standing at the girl's shoulder, exactly the offer Soreth had promised, arithmetic dressed as mercy, the hardest offer, the one that told her truthfully that her death would buy nothing and her life would cost only strangers. And the physician braced, one last time, out of an old habit 5 weeks had not quite broken, for the girl to break or bargain or grieve. Mara took her hand off the warm armor and looked at the assessor, and there was nothing in her flat, ordinary face that a dockhand in the cheap tears would have called triumph, only the cold, clean patience of a creature explaining a live circuit to someone about to touch it. "You'd better price me first," she said, "before you offer to recover me. That's the part your file skipped, isn't it? You came all this way to recover the thing that ran the city. You should measure it before you buy it. Physician, tell the assessor what I hold now." Navith told her. It told the assessor flatly, in the language of measurement that an assessor could not refuse, exactly what Mara Voss now held and would ever hold again. It told her the top of the girl's scale, which was large, larger than any other living thing the physician had measured, and which was a small fraction, of what the girl had held on the morning of the burn. It told her that the accumulator that could run a city entire had existed for exactly 5 weeks and had been spent, in a single act, into a gas giant's pull, all the way down, past the store into the furnace, past recovery. That what remained was a rigger who could nurse a failing core through its wear, a valuable thing to Coralt Anchorage and its 38,000 souls, and a thing of no particular value at all to the inner holdings, because the inner holdings did not need a core nursed. They had 100,000 riggers and cores that did not fail. "She spent it," Navith finished. "The thing you were sent to recover. She spent it on the burn, entire on purpose, past the point of any return, 4 days before your vessel arrived. You have come to price an asset that no longer exists. It ran a city for the length of a single burn and then it was gone, and the city it ran is turning over your head, and the thing that ran it is sitting at this rail with dirt on her hands, worth precisely what any good rigger is worth, and not one measure more." Assessor Corvalue was silent. She stood in the working light of the keel gallery over the turning face of Asara, and she did the thing she had done 311 times without error, which was to price what was in front of her. And she found, hand over hand over hand over hand, that the girl had done it first, had priced herself, had looked at exactly the offer Corvallis now made, days before Corvallis made it, and had understood that the only way to be unrecoverable was to make herself not worth recovering, and had spent the miracle so completely and so usefully that when the assessor finally arrived to close the column, there was no column to close. The asset had assessed itself down to nothing an assessor would cross the deep to collect, and had banked the difference in 38,000 living bodies where no arithmetic could reach it. It was, Corvallis thought, with the cold professional respect of one appraiser recognizing the work of another, the single most complete act of pricing she had ever seen. And it had been done by a human in a patched jacket who had never priced anything in her life, and who was looking at the assessor now with a flat patience that was not cruelty and was not triumph and was, the assessor understood at last, simply the look of a creature who had finished a piece of work correctly and was waiting without much interest for the room to catch up. "You made yourself worthless," Corvallis said slowly, "so that you could not be taken." "I made myself worth exactly what I want to be worth," Mara said. "A rigger who keeps a core alive for the people she grew up with. That's not worthless, assessor. That's the most valuable thing on this wheel. It's just not valuable to you." And that was the whole idea. Assessor Corvallis filed her amended assessment before the recovery vessel left orbit, and she filed it with all four hands, which was the Ilvany way of saying she stood behind every word. She had priced 311 holdings without error, and she did not intend to break the record with a lie, so she wrote the truth, and the truth was awkward for the Combine, and she wrote it anyway. Coral Anchorage was not a total loss. Coral Anchorage was a live operation with a functioning core, an orbit lifted clear of the belt, and a population of 38,000 who had, in the space of 5 weeks, stopped behaving like the dying and started behaving like the living, which any assessor could tell you was the single largest factor in whether a holding paid, and which no arithmetic had ever managed to buy on purpose. The asset the Combine had sent her to recover did not exist in the form the file described and could not be recovered, having been expended. And the recovery of it, she wrote, was no longer recommended on any grounds, financial or otherwise, and she underlined the otherwise, which was as close as an assessor of her caste came to writing down a thing she had felt in her 4 hands and could not put in a column. She did not fully understand, even filing it, what she had felt. She would think about it for a long time on the transit back and after, in the way the Ilvany think, turning a thing over hand by hand for years. It had something to do with the survey rating, the Ember grade designation on the human homeworld, the classification the deep survey used for the handful of worlds it filed under beyond return, the worlds that ran so hot and so hard that the ordinary business of being alive there required a body to carry more fire than the survivable galaxy considered reasonable. Corvallis had read that designation her whole career as a warning. She read it differently now. She had watched a creature off an Ember-grade world take the most valuable thing she had ever been sent to price and spend it, coldly, completely, on strangers, in a way that placed it forever beyond any price, and she understood, hand over hand, that this was not a thing the girl had done despite coming off such a world. It was the thing such a world made, a body that carries more fire than is reasonable and does not flinch from spending it, and counts the spending to the last measure, and gives it away where no one can take it back. The survey had it exactly backward, Corvallis thought. Beyond return was not a warning about the world. It was a description of its people. She took that thought back to the inner holdings, and it did not stay in the inner holdings, because thoughts like that do not, and that is a longer story than this one. Overseer Sareth did not go with her. He had the chance. Corvallis offered it, colleague to colleague, at the transit lock. A competent reclamation officer was wasted presiding over a live station, she said. The inner holdings would find better use for him. And Sareth stood in the smell of the machine that had once clung to his coat and did not any longer, because he had stopped noticing it, which is to say he had become part of it, and he declined. "I signed off a great many stations," he told her. "I was good at it. I told the girl that once that I never wondered whether I'd signed off the wrong one. I've decided I'd like to spend the rest of it wondering the other direction. How many of them I could have kept if I'd stood at the rail instead of signing the room off." His crest was level. Coralt is going to need an administrator who can fight the Combine for its funding and win. Now that it's a story the Combine wants to be seen keeping alive, rather than a loss it wants buried quietly. I find I'm very good at telling the Combine what it wants to be seen doing. It turns out to be the same skill as the other thing, pointed the other way. He extended a long slate-gray hand, the Viharn courtesy. "Safe transit, Assessor. Word your amendment carefully. I'll word mine to match." Corvallis took the hand and left, and the recovery vessel that had come to carry off a city in a body went home empty, carrying nothing but an amended file and a thought that would not stay in the holdings. The repair of the keel core took the better part of a year. The Combine funded it in the end, for exactly the reason Sareth had named. A station saved by a human being was worth more as a story kept alive than as a loss quietly closed, and the Combine understood story even when it did not understand 38,000 people. The parts came. The engineers who knew the parts came. Rithka, who had kept the old core breathing on salvage and spite for 11 years, finally got to lay hands on a proper repair, and it worked with a focus Navith had not seen in the chief before, because a machine you have nursed toward death for a decade, and are suddenly told you may heal instead, is a thing an engineer gives its whole self to. And through the year of the repair, Mara Voss nursed the core. She did it the way she had done everything without grandeur, 4 hours on and 8 off, her palm flat against the warm armor at the place where the old heart still skipped, holding the beat under the hitch while the chief rebuilt the spine around it. She was a smaller fire now. She would never be otherwise. She held what she held a great deal, more than any other living thing the physician had ever measured, and a fraction of the morning of the burn, and it was exactly enough for the work in front of her, which was the only measure she had ever cared about. The tears stopped looking at her the way they had, not because they forgot, but because she was among them every day, an ordinary young woman with dirt on her hands and a scald healing white down her jaw. And it is hard to keep looking at a legend when the legend is standing in the ration line ahead of you complaining about the coffee. The child from the low tiers found her again once in the keel gallery approach, older now by a year, still dirty-kneed, still fearless, and asked her, with the total seriousness of the young, whether it was true she had held the whole station up in her hands. Myra crouched down to its level, the way she had before, her burned arm gone strong again with the year. "For a minute," she said, "not by myself. There was a chief counting the machine, and a physician counting me, and 3 of my crew who lay down on a cold floor and gave me their heat when I ran out. Nobody holds a station up by themselves, kid. That's not how a load works. You put enough shoulders under it and it holds. I just happened to be the shoulder in the middle." She held out one finger and let the smallest bright spark she could still make hop from her fingertip to the child's palm, smaller than it had been a year ago. She felt the difference and did not mind it, and the child's whole face lit anyway. "See, it just wants somewhere to go, same as always. You give it somewhere to go and you count the whole way and you don't spend more than you mean to." She stood. "That's the trick. That's the only trick there ever was." The child ran back to its mother shouting that the lightning girl had put a star in its hand, and Mara watched it go. And this time there was no fear on her face at all, only the flat quiet of a creature who had finished a piece of work correctly and was in no hurry about anything. Navith found her at the rail that evening, where it always found her, with her palm on the warm armor over the healing heart of the station. "The chief says another 2 months, the physician said, and the core beats on its own again. Clean, no hitch. You'll be able to stop holding it. I know. Mara didn't open her eyes. I felt it today. The skip's getting shallower. Rithkaz good. Another 2 months and it won't need me at all. And then, Navath asked. It was a real question. The physician had wondered it for months and had not asked. When the core holds itself, and the station does not need the thing you are, what does the rigger who priced herself down to nothing do, when even the nothing is no longer needed? Mara was quiet a moment. Asara turned below the gallery, banded and vast and patient, the gas giant that had been going to eat her whole life and now only turned, held off, indefinitely, by a wheel lifted clear of its reach. Same thing I did before any of this, she said. I run a section. There's always a section. There's faults in this old wheel that got deferred for 20 years because it was dying, and it's not dying now, so somebody's got to go down into the conduit tree and clear them, and I know that tree better than anyone left alive on this station except the chief. She opened her eyes and looked out at the giant, and the flat cousin of a smile touched her mouth. That's the part your assessor never could have priced, physician. She came all that way to buy the thing that ran a city. But the thing that ran a city was only ever a rigger with a bad day at a junction and a graft that took wrong. Take the fire away, and I'm still the rigger. That's what she was really pricing, underneath all the numbers, and she'll never work it out because it doesn't go in a column. The fire was never the valuable part. The fire was just what I had the day the wheel needed it. She put her hand back on the warm armor. You spend what you've got where it's needed and you count it careful, and when it's gone you go back to work with your hands. That's not a miracle. My mother did it. Delgo did it. There's 38,000 people on this wheel who do it every day and nobody sends a ship to collect them. She closed her eyes again and put her shoulder, one more evening, under the place where the old heart still skipped, and held the beat true while the station slept and healed around her. An ordinary young woman with dirt on her hands, holding a load off a bad hoist the only way anyone ever holds anything, for a while on purpose, counting the whole way down. Below the gallery the giant turned, and did not take them, and the core came down the long spine and reached the place where it had forgotten itself for a year, and did not forget.